Chapter 2686. The effect of alcohol on Xiaochen was completely negligible. Even though the wine Xiaochen was currently drinking could be considered as immortal nectar, with Xiaochen's cultivation, he could easily dissolve the alcohol in his body. The effect of alcohol on Xiaochen was completely negligible. Even though the wine Xiaochen was currently drinking could be considered as immortal nectar, with Xiaochen's cultivation, he could easily dissolve the alcohol in his body. Therefore, after returning to his residence, Xiaochen circulated his spiritual energy and quickly evaporated the alcohol in his body. Then, he walked over to Qin Shuru and the other women with a smile. Seeing this, the women asked, "How is it? Did things go well?" "Very well." "Is that so? Then husband, have you arranged any positions for us?" Gu Lingyao asked with a mischievous smile. The women all knew that Xiaochen wanted to establish the sacred palace. When they heard Gu Lingyao's words, Xiaochen smiled and patted her on the head. He gently scolded, "What other positions do you want? Isn't being the wife of the sacred lord not enough?" Qin Shuru and the other women did not hold any positions as elders or high-level officials in the sacred palace. However, since they were Xiaochen's wives, their status was already extremely high. Gu Lingyao was just joking. She did not really want to hold any high-level positions in the sacred palace. That would be too tiring. After scolding Gu Lingyao jokingly, Xiaochen looked around. He did not see Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao, so he asked, "Where are those two brats? Where did they go crazy again?" "They went to the inner sect. They've been like this recently." Qin Shuru replied with a smile. As Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao grew up, the two little guys also yearned for the outside world more and more. From time to time, they would run out and hang out with some inner sect disciples. Of course, the two little guys hid their identities. Otherwise, no inner sect disciple would dare to be friends with them. After all, their identities were different and many things were already destined. Xiao Yao and Xiao Luo were already 18 years old this year. Moreover, because they grew up in such a good cultivation environment, even though these two little guys were young, their cultivation wasn't low. Hearing Qin Shuru's answer, Xiaochen smiled and did not say anything. He only secretly thought in his heart that it was time to let these two little guys go out and gain experience. Previously, because of their young age, Xiaochen did not agree with the idea of the two of them going out to gain experience. Moreover, the situation in the Great Thousand World was not stable at that time. But it was good now. With Xia Tian's death, the biggest threat had disappeared. It was about time. However, all of this had to wait until the dust of the sacred palace had settled. Moreover, for the first time these two brats went out to gain experience, Xiaochen would definitely send people to secretly protect them. It had to be known that these two little guys did not have any experience at all. They were just like blank pieces of paper. People had to grow up by themselves. Xiaochen did not want these two little guys to always live under his care. In the future, they would definitely have their own path. Xiaochen thought in his heart, but now was not the time. For the time being, he did not have the energy to deal with these things. In the next few days, Xiaochen was also busy. After all, with the establishment of the sacred palace, Xiaochen, as the sacred master, naturally could not completely be a shopkeeper who did not do anything. Some trivial matters could be left to his subordinates to deal with, but some important and core matters, Xiaochen had to personally pay attention to. Therefore, in the next few days, Xiaochen was also very busy. However, compared to Xiaochen's busyness, all the disciples in the sword sect, no, it should be called the sacred palace now, were pleasantly surprised. With the establishment of the 5 sects by Tsang Xing and the others, the disciples of the sacred palace were gradually divided into the 5 sections. The disciples of the sword sect naturally belonged to the sword sect, and the disciples of the saber sect belonged to the saber sect. With the continuous improvement of the 5 sects, many disciples also heard the news that the higher-ups were preparing to establish the sacred palace. For a time, many disciples were surprised. Disciples could be seen everywhere discussing the sacred palace, but there was good news. With the establishment of the Sacred Palace, the disciples of the four great sects, including the Saber sect and the Moon Palace, quickly integrated. Moreover, they were also full of expectations for the future Sacred Palace. At the same time, they also had a sense of identity. They were no longer as opposed to joining the Sword sect and the Sword sect. This was also one of the original intentions of Shaochen when he established the Sword sect. He wanted the disciples of the four great sects to integrate with the disciples of the Sword sect faster, so that everyone would recognize each other from the bottom of their hearts. The Sacred Palace. I didn't expect the Sacred Master to establish the Sacred Palace. That's right, if the Sacred Palace is established, it will probably be the most powerful sect in the history of the vast thousand world. Of course, that's for sure. How can a sect established by combining the strength of the five great Lingtian sects not be powerful? Many disciples were discussing the Sacred Palace. It was certain that once the Sacred Palace was established, it would definitely become the most powerful sect in the history of the vast thousand world. At the same time, in addition to their vision for the future, many disciples were more concerned about the Sacred Palace's division of disciples. After all, this was closely related to them. Moreover, due to the establishment of the Sacred Palace, the division of disciples was more strict and detailed. At the same time, it was also directly linked to cultivation resources. The higher the level of a disciple, the more cultivation resources they would receive. This time, the senior management of the Sacred Palace had even raised the treatment of the disciples of the higher levels to an amazing height. The disciples of the entire Sacred Palace were divided into 6 levels, which were the outer disciples, inner disciples, elite disciples, core disciples, the disciples of the 5 sects, and the chosen. Needless to say, the outer disciples were not much different from before, but their cultivation resources were also much better than before. The disciples of the 5 sects, to put it bluntly, were the disciples of the 10 great sword fanatics and the 10 great saber disciples. The 5 sects each had 10 great disciples, and these 10 great disciples could be called the direct disciples of the 5 sections. As for the 10 great chosen who were above the 5 sects, they had not been decided yet, but the treatment of the 10 great chosen made everyone envious. This was because the 10 great chosen were already above the 5 sects and were not under the jurisdiction of the 5 sects at all. They directly took orders from the Holy Lord Shaochen. At the same time, it was said that after becoming one of the 10 great chosen, one would be able to receive personal guidance from Shaochen and could even cultivate with the ancestors. Moreover, the cultivation resources were also exaggerated. The 10 great chosen had not been decided yet, and there would be a competition. However, the establishment of the 5 sects was already in full swing, and many disciples were also included in the 5 sections. Due to the establishment of the 5 sects, every disciple had the opportunity to be reclassified as a disciple. The prerequisite was that they had sufficient talent and strength. Otherwise, there was naturally no need to talk about it. Seeking collection, monthly votes, recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2687. The establishment of the Sacred Palace proceeded in an orderly manner, and the numerous disciples were divided into the 5 sects one after another. However, because the disciples had to be re-evaluated, the speed was actually not very fast. However, these matters obviously did not need Shaochen to worry about. Only the Zhangxing, Dao Ju and the others would deal with them. Moreover, from the beginning to the end, the few of them had handled the matter perfectly and steadily. They did not encounter much resistance. Just as Shaochen had expected, the establishment of the Sacred Palace was the will of the people and the irresistible trend. Time passed day by day, and the expansion of the Sword sect had also reached the final stage. Once the expansion was completed, the establishment of the Sacred Palace could be announced to the public. Of course, the former East Sword City was also in the process of being rebuilt. Of course, the current East Sword City was no longer called East Sword City. Instead, it was renamed East Saint City. Including the previous West Sword City and the other 3 major cities, they were also renamed West Saint City, South Saint City, and North Saint City. How is it? how are the reactions of the other sects? In the residence, Xiaochen asked Xianyuanling. The establishment of the sacred palace naturally had to be witnessed by the various major forces. At the same time, it could be considered a grand event in the Great Thousand World. Xianyuanling replied with a smile. There was no special reaction, everything went smoothly. Given the power and influence of the sacred palace, the major forces of the Great Thousand World naturally did not dare to make the slightest move. Hearing this, Xiaochen nodded slightly. The establishment of the sacred palace was actually helpful in controlling the Great Thousand World to a certain extent. After all, the sacred palace was a brand new sect, and represented a new life for the Great Thousand World. Moreover, although the sacred palace had not been truly established, the strength that it had displayed so far had far surpassed the previous sword sect. Xiaochen secretly breathed a sigh of relief when everything was handled properly. The establishment of the sacred palace was very important to Xiaochen, so there could not be any mistakes. That's good. Next is the most critical period, and there can't be any accidents. Xiaochen nodded as he reminded. In the face of Xiaochen's instructions, Xianyuanling naturally nodded in agreement. After which, the two of them exchanged a few more words before Xianyuanling bid farewell and left. In the next few days, while Xiaochen was busy, he also took the time to check on the progress of the 5 gates. The progress was almost the same, and it would not take long for them to be completely completed. The corners of Xiaochen's mouth unconsciously curved into a faint smile as he looked at the many new disciples joining the 5 factions. The establishment of the 5 factions was strongly advocated by Xiaochen. It was in line with the development of the sacred palace and would allow everyone to display their strengths. Moreover, based on Xiaochen's view of the sacred palace, pure sword Dao and blade Dao were not suitable for the sacred palace. In Xiaochen's view, the sacred palace should be a multifaceted sect. A single direction of development like the sword sect was not something Xiaochen wanted to see. In Xiaochen's view, the sacred palace should be a flourishing sect. Only in this way could they truly catch up with the immortal palace and cloud palace. He strolled around the sect and also checked on the expansion work. With the support of huge financial resources, the expansion work was progressing very quickly and would be completed in a few days at most. At the same time, after the expansion, the entire sacred palace was divided into 6 saint peaks and 81 main peaks. The central peak was where Xiaochen and the other higher-ups of the sacred palace lived. Of course, the martial skills hall, cultivation method hall, and some of the more important cultivation mystic realms were also on this peak. The central Saint Peak was protected by the other 5 Saint Peaks. The 5 Saint Peaks formed a circle, firmly protecting the central Saint Peak. These 5 Saint Peaks were naturally where the 5 gates were located, and each gate occupied a Saint Peak. As for the other 81 main peaks, they were all different. However, there were so many immortal peaks that formed the entire sacred palace. Compared to the sword sect, the current sacred palace was even more majestic. Even from afar, it gave people the feeling of an immortal holy land. Moreover, in order to make the sacred palace's world spirit chi even denser, countless spirit-gathering formations had been set up around the sacred palace. These formations operated 24 hours a day, forcibly raising the sacred palace's world spirit chi to an extremely terrifying level. The air was filled with spirit beads formed from liquefied world spirit chi. It was as if it was drizzling, but these raindrops were very strange. They didn't fall to the ground, but instead gave the air a refreshing feeling. All of this, coupled with the magnificent scenery of the Cloud Palace, really made people feel like they were in a fairyland. It had completely changed and couldn't be compared to the sword sect. In order to achieve this, Xiaochen had spent a huge amount of financial and material resources. It could even be said that he had emptied the sword sect. However, this was nothing to the current sacred palace. With the Saber sect, Moon Palace, Dan Valley, and Talisman sect joining, the sacred palace didn't become poor. On the contrary, it became even richer. In particular, Dan Valley and Talisman's sect should never be underestimated. As sects where alchemists and talisman masters gathered, these two sects were definitely the wealthiest sects in the Great Thousand World. Their joining also brought great wealth to the sacred palace. As such, Xiaochen had the confidence to transform the sacred palace to its current state. Everything went smoothly. After strolling around, Xiaochen returned to his residence. 3 days later, the sacred palace officially announced its establishment and invited all forces in the Great Thousand World to the sacred palace to witness its establishment. As soon as the news came out, the Great Thousand World was naturally in an uproar. Although many people had heard the news before, they couldn't help but feel excited when they received the sacred palace's invitation. After all, the sacred palace was a sect founded by the combined power of the 5 great Ling Tian sects. It could be said to be unprecedented. In the history of the Great Thousand World, no other sect could compare to it. Countless cultivators rushed to the sacred palace from all directions. The province where the sacred palace was located was renamed the Xingzhou province. It had truly become the center of the Great Thousand World, attracting countless cultivators. The establishment of the sacred palace had completely ushered in a new era in the Great Thousand World. It had finally completed the last step of the replacement of the old with the new. From now on, the Great Thousand World would enter a new era. Xiaochen, Xianyuan Ling, Sang Xing, Dao Ju, and the other senior members of the sacred palace were also full of expectations for the future. Such a powerful sect made everyone feel a strong sense of pride. After all, it was a sect that they had founded together. Please add it to your collection, please recommend it. End of chapter. Chapter 2688. The sacred palace was officially established, and it had invited all the major forces in the Great Thousand World to participate in the ceremony. Naturally, no force dared to refuse the sacred palace's invitation. In fact, everyone was scrambling like a flock of ducks. The sacred palace was officially established, and it had invited all the major forces in the Great Thousand World to participate in the ceremony. Naturally, no force dared to refuse the sacred palace's invitation. In fact, everyone was scrambling like a flock of ducks. Now, even a blind person knew that the sacred palace was a powerful backing. If they could cling to this backing, they would be able to live a carefree life for at least a few generations. This was the case with the Wang family some time ago. It was because Wang Mengyao was a disciple of the sacred palace that the Wang family's matter was resolved so easily. It could be seen that even if someone from their family could enter the sword sect, it would be a kind of guarantee for them. Of course, Wang Mengyao was the disciple of the sword fanatic after all, and was different from ordinary disciples. Even so, it didn't stop everyone from having their own thoughts. Countless cultivators gathered from all directions, and for a time, the 4 sacred cities around the sacred palace were overcrowded. However, with so many people gathered in the city, it was strange that no one dared to cause trouble, and there wasn't even a single conflict. Everyone looked very humble and amiable. But after thinking about it carefully, this was the sword sect's territory after all. Who would dare to cause trouble in the 4 sacred cities? For the time being, they couldn't enter the sacred palace, so everyone could only rest in the 4 sacred cities. The sacred palace had also arranged accommodation for everyone. Although it wasn't good, at least no one was allowed to sleep in the open. This also showed the sacred palace's heroic spirit and structure as the overlord of the Great Thousand World. Xiaochen didn't pay much attention to the 4 sacred cities. At this time, Xiaochen had been finalizing the process of the sacred palace's founding hall with Xianyuan Ling and the others. In fact, according to Xiaochen's idea, the founding hall didn't need to be too complicated because it wouldn't be meaningful. However, there was one step that was indispensable in the founding hall, and that was to select the first 10 chosen of the sacred palace. This was unanimously agreed upon by Xiaochen and the others. After the establishment of the 5 sects, the disciples of the Sword Fanatic, Saber Disciple, and Moonlight Disciple were no longer enough to represent the top disciples of the sacred palace. Therefore, the selection of the 10 holy sons was imperative. These 10 chosen represented the pinnacle of all the disciples of the sacred palace and were also considered the future of the sacred palace. Not only would they obtain a high status, but they would also be vigorously nurtured by the sacred palace and be regarded as the future successors of the sacred palace. The entire process was not complicated under Xiao Chen's instructions, so it was quickly finalized. In this way, the final preparations were completed. 3 days later, many cultivators arrived at the sacred palace one after another. The sacred palace was where the sword sect used to be, but when the cultivators arrived at the sacred palace, they were shocked by the sight before them. This was completely different from the sword sect in many people's memories. Although the mountain gate of the sword sect was located in one of the few treasured lands in the Great Thousand World, it couldn't be compared to the sacred palace in front of them. This is the holy palace? What a dense spiritual chi of heaven and earth. The scenery is picturesque, a paradise on earth. Similar exclamations of amazement were constantly emitted from the crowd, and the sacred palace disciple in charge of leading the crowd couldn't help but smile after hearing such praise and exclamations, his heart filled with pride. Wonderful brush pavilion. The changes in the sacred palace were indeed like a rebirth, as if they were in a paradise. In particular, the rich spiritual chi of heaven and earth was something that everyone coveted. Without mentioning anything else, just the richness of the spiritual chi was enough to make everyone excited, and this was only the outer area of the sacred palace. It was hard to imagine what level the spiritual chi in the core area of the sacred palace would reach. Accommodations were arranged in the sacred palace one by one, and the establishment of the main hall was scheduled to be held 3 days later. These people were temporarily resting in the sacred palace, and the treatment they received was naturally linked to their respective status and forces. Because almost all the sects in the Great Thousand World had been invited to the establishment of the sacred palace this time, there were many people who came. The sect masters and sect masters of some small sects could only enjoy the same treatment as ordinary sacred palace disciples, where 2 of them would share a room. Even so, these sect masters were still extremely excited, and some even couldn't help but begin to cultivate. The spiritual chi in the sacred palace was just too rich, and no one wanted to let go of such an opportunity. On the other hand, the powerful sect leaders, or the experts with decent cultivation, were treated much better. They had their own private rooms prepared for them, and some even had their own private courtyards. Of course, all treatment was determined by one's status and identity. In this way, the busy middle 3 days quickly passed. Early in the morning, the sacred palace was completely lively. Countless figures flew to and fro on the sacred peak in the middle, and many people had already gathered in the main square to participate in the establishment of the main hall. Everyone gathered together and chatted in low voices, not daring to do anything out of line. Just like this, under everyone's waiting, the upper echelons of the sacred palace finally arrived. The first step of the establishment ceremony was to announce the appointments. After all, the establishment of the sacred palace meant that very few people knew about the structure of the sacred palace, and not many people knew who would take up which position. Therefore, this step was to introduce the main members of the sacred palace. The first batch of people to appear were the elders of the 5 sections. Almost all of them were former vice sect masters of the Sword Sect, Saber Sect, Moon Palace, and other sects, as well as elders with real power. There were quite a few people, more than 100 of them, and this wasn't all of them. The elders of the 5 sects who could stand on the high platform were all people with real power, and the elders who were only in name didn't have the qualifications to sit on the same level as them. Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others were among them. As the elders of the 5 sects appeared, everyone present was stunned. Looking at the 100 people on the high platform, some people couldn't help but sigh. An End Realm expert can only become an elder of the 5 sects? Nonsense, this is the sacred palace. Although End Realm experts aren't bad, they can't be considered the top in the sacred palace. Many people were shocked. Nangong Guan and the others, who were all End Realm experts, were only elders of the sacred palace's 5 sections. One had to know that the elders of the 5 sects weren't really high up in the sacred palace. At most, they were like the pillars of the sacred palace. After all, the elders of the 5 sects didn't have the qualifications to participate in the true decisions of the sacred palace. At most, they were responsible for the actions of the 5 sects, and could only be responsible for the matters of their own sections. They couldn't interfere with the matters of the other sections. But even so, in order to become an elder of the 5 sects, one's cultivation had to be at least end realm. Chapter 2689. End realm masters could only serve as elders of the 5 sects in the Saint Palace, which shocked everyone present. After all, in the outside world, end realm masters were strong enough to establish their own sects. End realm masters could only serve as elders of the 5 sects in the Saint Palace, which shocked everyone present. After all, in the outside world, end realm masters were strong enough to establish their own sects. However, this was just the beginning. After Nandong Guan and the other elders of the 5 sects appeared, the 5 sect masters, Song Xing, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, Dan Xian, and Chu Ming appeared one after another. These 5 people were all Emperor Realm masters now. Even Song Xing had successfully broken through to the Emperor Realm with the help of the Saint Palace's massive resources. As for Dao Ju and the others, they had already broken through to the Emperor Realm long ago. With the appearance of these 5 people, the Saint Palace briefly introduced the situation of the 5 sects to everyone present. There were 5 sects under the Saint Palace, namely the Sword Sect, the Saber Sect, the Moon Sect, the Alchemy Sect, and the Talisman Sect. These 5 sects covered all the disciples of the Saint Palace. Moreover, there were many elders, deacons, and other masters in these 5 sections. These 5 sects could be said to be the cornerstones and mainstays of the Saint Palace. They supported the entire Saint Palace. After the introduction of the 5 sects, the next 2 vice sect masters of the Saint Palace were Long Qing and Xian Yuan Ling. These 2 were Xiao Chen's eldest brother and second sister. No one objected to them being the vice sect masters of the Saint Palace. Moreover, their current cultivation was only a step away from the ancestor realm. In terms of combat strength, they were probably above Dao Ju and the others. In fact, there were some things that outsiders didn't know. When Xiaochen suggested that Xian Yuan Ling and Long Qing be the vice sect masters, there were indeed some people in the Saint Palace who were unhappy. Although they didn't dare to say it out loud, there were some who objected behind their backs. After all, the relationship between Long Qing, Xian Yuan Ling, and Xiaochen inevitably made everyone feel that Xiao Chen's appointment was based on personal feelings. With the 2's aptitude and strength, they were not enough to become deputy sect masters of the Holy Palace. However, as soon as this rumor spread, Long Qing and Xian Yuan Ling used their own strength to prove themselves. Without many people knowing, Long Qing and Xian Yuan Ling defeated Xiao Xiao and Dao Ju respectively, proving that their strength was above Dao Ju's. In addition, Xian Yuan Ling's contributions to the Sacred Palace and the abilities he displayed during this period had won the approval of Song Xing and many other higher-ups. As a result, the matter was settled. In any case, with Xiao Chen's current prestige, no one could stop him if he insisted on making Xian Yuan Ling and Long Qing the vice sect masters of the Sacred Palace. After all, Xiao Chen wasn't a puppet. In the Sacred Palace, Xiao Chen's prestige was definitely the highest. The selection of the vice sect masters could be said to be unexpected but also expected. After all, the Sacred Palace was a sect that completely belonged to Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen could be considered the founder of the Sacred Palace. Although Xiao Chen had the final say in the Sacred Palace, no one dared to look down on his words. After the introduction of the 2 vice sect masters, it was time to introduce the various patriarchs. Everyone had already guessed that Jun Wuya, Dao Xiong, Luo Xing, Dan Qingyang and the others would undoubtedly become the patriarchs of the Sacred Palace. In terms of position, the patriarchs were on equal footing with Xiao Chen. However, to put it bluntly, they didn't have any authority and were more like a symbol. Therefore, everyone knew that Dao Xiong and the other patriarchs had mostly retired behind the scenes. In the future, these patriarchs probably wouldn't pay too much attention to the matters of the Sacred Palace, nor would they participate in the decisions of the Sacred Palace. In fact, this was indeed the case. According to the current structure of the Sacred Palace, the patriarchs actually didn't have much authority. After the introduction of the Sacred Palace's higher-ups, it was time for the most anticipated moment, Sacred Master Xiao Chen. He had single-handedly developed the sword sect to the top force in the vast thousand domains, established the Sacred Palace, and was now the strongest expert in the vast thousand domains. Xiao Chen could be said to be a legend of this era. His brilliance suppressed everyone of his generation. Even Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others couldn't be compared to Xiao Chen. Dance. Under the expectant gazes of the crowd, Xiao Chen slowly appeared on the high platform with Qin Shuru and the other girls in tow. They stood in the middle of the high platform. Dressed in a white robe with a faint smile on his face, Xiao Chen's appearance caused the Sacred Palace disciples to burst into excited cheers. Sacred Master, many Sacred Palace disciples worshipped Xiao Chen almost blindly. Needless to say, the disciples of the Sword Sect and even the disciples of the Saber Sect were the same. As for the experts of the other major forces, there was only submission in their eyes when they looked at Xiao Chen. Accompanied by the girls, Xiao Chen came to the front of the high platform with a smile on his face. He looked at everyone present and said with a faint smile, "Welcome, everyone, to my Sacred Palace's founding hall. I thank you all for coming." It was a simple thank you in a calm and gentle tone, but it clearly reached everyone's ears. After listening to Xiao Chen's words, the scene quickly quieted down. No one dared to interrupt while Xiao Chen was speaking. After all, he was the most powerful person in the Great Thousand World. Today, Xiao Chen's every word and action was enough to determine the direction of the entire Great Thousand World. After a simple thank you, it was time for the banquet. Because it was the founding of the Sacred Palace, the many Sacred Palace elders and deacons also drank to their heart's content with the experts of the major forces. The scene was peaceful. Of course, Xiao Chen also invited several sect masters of the major forces of the Great Thousand World to sit with him. However, those who were qualified to sit at Xiao Chen's table were all well-known figures in the Great Thousand World. Their strength and status could be said to be second only to the Sacred Palace. In the current Great Thousand World, the situation of the Sacred Palace being the dominant force was already unchangeable. Under the Sacred Palace, 6 major forces had risen. These 6 major forces were also the old forces of the Great Thousand World. They had all risen with the help of the great changes in the Great Thousand World this time. Of course, these 6 major forces had always been on the side of the Sacred Palace from the beginning. In other words, their rise was most likely related to the help of the Sacred Palace. The Sacred Palace had become the overlord of the great wide world, so any force that they wanted to rise would have the possibility of rising. The 6 great forces were sharp enough to seize this opportunity. At this time, the sect masters of the 6 major forces were sitting at the same table with Xiao Chen. This was also the Sacred Palace's affirmation of them. However, the sect masters of the 6 major forces seemed a little restrained when drinking with Xiao Chen at the same table. After all, they knew very well how they had achieved their current achievements. Apart from the Sacred Palace, they were the most powerful existences in the Great Thousand World. However, in front of the Sacred Palace, they were nothing. It could even be said that Xiao Chen only needed to say a word to send them into the abyss of eternal damnation. Chapter 2690. The sect masters of the 6 great forces cautiously sat at the same table as Xiao Chen. Seeing their restrained appearances, Xiao Chen took the initiative to say with a smile, "Everyone, there's no need to be like this. Today is a happy day, so there's no need to be so restrained. There's no need to treat me as the Holy Lord. Let's drink and chat. Feel free to say whatever you want to say." Xiao Chen was not a difficult person to get along with and would not casually use his power to oppress others, especially on such a happy day. Therefore, Xiao Chen did not want to see everyone so restrained. Moreover, the situation in the entire vast thousand world was now completely stable. At this time, the various great forces in the vast thousand world were in a state of submission to the Sacred Palace and would not pose any threat to the Sacred Palace. Therefore, Xiao Chen's attitude towards everyone was very friendly. Xiao Chen was very casual with his friends, unlike with his enemies. Moreover, Xiaochen did not want to lose the last two people by his side as his strength grew. This was not something Xiaochen wanted to see. Hearing Xiaochen's words, the 6 people relaxed a little and said in unison, "Holy Lord, please." "Ha, that's right. Everyone, please." Hearing this, Xiaochen laughed heartily and then took the initiative to fill the wine cup in his hand. Under Xiaochen's deliberate guidance, the atmosphere at the table quickly became familiar. The sect masters of the 6 great forces also began to talk more and everyone really began to chat like friends. However, no one present was a fool. Although it seemed harmonious and the conversation was quite lively, everyone knew what to say and what not to say on such an occasion. Therefore, when Xiaochen asked, "Is everything going well in your sects recently? Do you need the Sacred Palace's help?" "Don't worry, Holy Lord. We are all fine. If you have any instructions, please let us know. We are willing to be at your beck and call." Hearing this, the 6 people replied in unison. Not only did he flatter Xiaochen a little, but he also took the opportunity to once again express his loyalty. However, Xiaochen smiled in response. "Haha, everyone, you are too serious. The situation in the vast thousand world is basically stable now, so there's nothing to worry about. In fact, I supported you in the beginning because of the situation in the vast thousand world in the future. Now that the Sacred Palace is sitting in the center, the 6 of you are in the 6 corners of the vast thousand world. I hope that you can guard one corner so that the vast thousand world can be peaceful for a long time." Xiaochen supported the 6 great forces in the first place. First of all, these 6 people were the first to express their loyalty to him, and there was no doubt that their loyalty. Secondly, after Xiaochen's adjustments, the sects of the 6 were now located in the 6 major areas of the vast thousand domains, while the Sacred Palace sat in the middle, as Xiaochen had said. As a result, the situation of the entire vast thousand domains was basically firmly controlled by the Sacred Palace and the 6 major forces. It was impossible for the Sacred Palace to deal with everything in the vast thousand world on its own. Not to mention whether the Sacred Palace had the ability to deal with some trivial matters, they were not in the mood to deal with them. Therefore, these matters were handed over to the lower sects, and the 6 great sects were the best choice. This was also an important part of Xiaochen's plan for the vast thousand world. But now it seemed that the result was perfect, and Xiaochen was very satisfied. Hearing Xiaochen's words, all 6 of them replied respectfully. "Don't worry, Holy Lord. We will not let you down." They chatted happily, and so did the others. Accompanied by the poison experts of the Sacred Palace, the atmosphere of the banquet was lively and there was not the slightest tension. After all, the purpose of the Sacred Palace was not to enslave the vast thousand world, and Xiaochen did not have this intention. From the beginning, Xiaochen's position in the Sacred Palace was the guardian of the vast thousand world. They would not casually interfere in the affairs of other forces. They only needed to protect the stability of the vast thousand world and even help it develop. This was the true purpose of the Sacred Palace. Therefore, Xiaochen wanted the Sacred Palace to be a sect that everyone respected, not a sect that people feared. This was the starting point of Xiaochen and the Sacred Palace. While many experts were drinking to their heart's content, some juniors also spontaneously gathered together. Many people had brought their juniors to the Sacred Palace to manage. On one hand, it was to increase their knowledge, and on the other hand, it was to let them see with their own eyes what the number 1 sect of the vast thousand world was like. Therefore, the juniors of the various forces and the disciples of the Sacred Palace naturally gathered together to chat. The higher-ups of the Sacred Palace did not stop them, and they had even divided a special area for the juniors to communicate. On one of the 81 main peaks, there was a gathering place for the juniors. There were many pavilions here, and the scenery was beautiful. The juniors were chatting and drinking here, and there were even people sparring with each other. Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were also here under Xiao Wan's lead. Compared to hanging out with their father, the 2 boys preferred to interact with people of the same age. However, the 2 did not reveal their identities. They casually found a pavilion and began to chat and drink with a few people inside. Under Xiao Chen's nurturing from a young age, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were very easygoing and did not have the habit of oppressing others. Although they had the arrogance of young people, they would not bully the weak. Since they were all youngsters, they naturally became familiar with each other very quickly. Everyone drank together, and Xiao Yao quickly became familiar with a young man named Lu Yu. Lu Yu and Xiao Yao were about the same age, and both of them were newbies who did not have much experience in the world. Lu Yu came from the Purple Sun sect, which was one of the 6 great sects in the Great Thousand World. Moreover, as the only son of the Purple Sun sect master, Lu Yu's status could be said to be one of the noblest people in the Great Thousand World. Like Xiao Yao, Lu Yu had not gone out to train because of his age, and he was also very curious about the outside world. This made the two of them hit it off immediately. However, a casual sentence from Lu Yu made Xiao Yao fly into a rage. "Brother Xiao Yao, I heard that the sacred clan master has 2 sons, but they rarely appear in front of others. These 2 are the greatest second-generation masters in the Great Thousand World. In my opinion, these 2 must be arrogant people who bully the weak." Completely unaware of Xiao Yao's identity, Lu Yu's joking words caused Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao's faces to darken. Then, Xiao Yao said with some displeasure, "Brother Lu Yu, have you seen the 2 sons of the sacred clan master?" "Of course not. How could I have seen second-generation masters like them?" "Then how could you reckon that the 2 of them are arrogant good-for-nothings who bully the weak? Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 2691. Xiao Yao, Xiao Lao, and Lu Yu were all only 18 or 19 years old. Although their talents were not bad, and they had a cultivation environment that ordinary people could not hope for, purely in terms of mentality, the 3 of them were still very immature. Therefore, when they were chatting, most of the time, they didn't know what to say and what not to say. Lu Yu did not know Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao at all. However, given their backgrounds, Lu Yu thought that they were the kind of arrogant people, not because of anything else, but because they were the sons of Xiao Chen, the top 2nd generation in the Great Thousand World, and no one else could compare to them. Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao naturally would not admit this. Since they were young, they had never thought of using their father's power to do anything. The 2 brothers had always worked hard to cultivate, and their biggest goal was to surpass their father one day. Therefore, after hearing Lu Yu's words, Xiao Yao was the first to disagree. Once a young man's anger rose, he naturally could not suppress it. He slammed the table and looked at Lu Yu angrily. "Lu Yu, don't talk nonsense. If you have the ability, fight with me." Since Lu Yu said that he was a good-for-nothing, then he would let his strength speak for him. He wanted to see if he was a good-for-nothing. Seeing how angry Xiao Yao was all of a sudden, Lu Yu was stunned. This kid was indeed a little slow. If it were anyone else, they would have seen through the clues. However, Lu Yu did not think that Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were Xiao Chen's sons. Seeing how angry Xiao Yao was, Lu Yu did not think too much and agreed immediately. "Let's fight. Do you think I'm afraid of you?" The 2 young men agreed to fight just like that. Soon, the 2 of them came to the battle arena outside the pavilion. Seeing the 2 of them waiting, Qin Kunlun, Li Suifeng, Lu Qingyao, Xiao Luan, and the rest who were gathered nearby were all stunned. Li Suifeng smiled and said, "Junior sister Xiao, your younger brother is going to fight with someone. Aren't you going to do anything about it?" As a disciple of the 10 Great Blade disciples, Li Suifeng naturally knew the identities of Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. Hearing this, Xiao Luan also calmly took a sip of the wine in his cup. Following which, he said unhurriedly, "It's just a spar, why should we care?" After saying that, Xiao Luan glanced at Lu Yu who was fighting Xiao Yao. Given Xiao Luan's eyesight, he could naturally see through Lu Yu's strength. However, he was only at the immortal venerable realm, the same realm as Xiao Yao. Just because Lu Yu and Xiao Yao were only immortal venerables didn't mean that their cultivation bases were low. Although immortal venerables weren't considered high in the sacred palace, it wasn't the end of it. Xiao Yao, Lu Yu, and the others were all immortal venerables at the age of 18. This was something that Xiaochen wouldn't have dared to dream about. Having such a cultivation base at such a young age was the benefit of having a top-notch cultivation environment. It could be said that they had one at the starting line. Xiao Luan wasn't worried about Xiao Yao, who was at the same realm. Although this kid seemed unreliable, his combat strength was absolutely indisputable. He had been carefully nurtured by his father since he was young. Furthermore, Xin Yuanling and Wang Qing knew that Xiao Yao's combat strength wasn't simple. As for Lu Yu, Xiao Luan didn't know him. He then asked curiously, "Who's that little guy?" "Oh, the young sect master of Purple Sun sect, Lu Yu. He's about the same age as your younger brother." "I heard that he's also a talented kid," Qin Kunlun said with a smile. Although not many people knew about Lu Yu's identity, Purple Sun sect didn't deliberately hide it. Therefore, it wasn't strange for Qin Kunlun to know about it. After learning about Lu Yu's identity, Xiao Luan didn't say anything else. Meanwhile, on the stage, Xiao Yao and Lu Yu were also engaged in a fierce battle. Neither of them were weak, and their combat strength was very strong. However, as soon as they exchanged blows, many people present could tell at a glance that the two of them had almost no combat experience. Moreover, their combat awareness was very poor. This could only mean one thing: the two of them didn't have any experience in a life-and-death battle. Basically, they rarely fought with others, let alone a life-and-death battle. They had strength, but didn't know how to exert its full power. This was their biggest shortcoming. Of course, the people present were basically disciples of Sacred Palace and other sections. They didn't have any intention of mocking the two of them because they knew very well that the two of them were very young. They must have followed their elders out. Many people didn't know much about Xiao Yao and Lu Yu, but the disciples of Sacred Palace and Purple Sun sect knew the two of them. However, compared to Lu Yu, Xiao Yao was clearly more mysterious. Even the people of Purple Sun sect didn't know about Xiao Yao's identity. In the pavilion where the Purple Sun sect disciples were, there were also a few Sacred Palace disciples accompanying them. One of the Purple Sun sect disciples asked, "Is the person fighting junior brother Lu Yu a disciple of your Sacred Palace?" "Not really, but this kid's origin is very mysterious. He should be the junior of some higher-up," replied a Sacred Palace disciple. Xiao Yao wasn't a Sacred Palace disciple, but he often wandered around the Sacred Palace, so many people knew about him. However, not many people knew about Xiao Yao's identity because Xiao Yao had never revealed his identity to outsiders. Therefore, apart from Xiao Luan, Qin Kunlun, Li Suifeng and a few others, there weren't many people who knew about Xiao Yao's identity. They only guessed that Xiao Yao was the junior of some higher-up of the Sacred Palace. The Purple Sun sect disciple nodded slightly and then looked at the stage with some vigilance. Lu Yu's identity was needless to say, but Xiao Yao's identity couldn't be underestimated either. If he really was the junior of some higher-up of the Sacred Palace, then he couldn't be offended. Although the Purple Sun sect wasn't weak now, they definitely didn't have the qualifications to provoke the Sacred Palace. The Purple Sun sect disciple who had been paying attention to the battle between the two was ready to intervene at any time. There was no problem with two juniors sparring. Even if the higher-ups of both sides found out, they wouldn't really care. However, it would be troublesome if they were injured. The Purple Sun sect disciple wasn't as relaxed as Xiao Luan and Lu Yu. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Xiao Yao and Lu Yu's battle became more and more intense. Speaking of which, this was the first time the two of them had fought so intensely with someone. It was an enjoyable battle for both of them, especially for Xiao Yao. Previously in the Sacred Palace, Xiao Yao couldn't find an opponent at all. Even when he fought with his brother Xiao Lao, he couldn't really go all out. However, in the battle with Lu Yu, Xiao Yao had completely let go. This feeling made Xiao Yao very excited. At the same time, as the battle continued, the crowd also felt that the two little guys were rapidly changing, or rather, improving. Please add, please recommend. Chapter 2692. In the beginning, Xiao Yao and Lu Yu had almost zero combat experience. As the battle continued, Xiao Yao and Lu Yu were like sponges, crazily absorbing all knowledge about combat. In the beginning, Xiao Yao and Lu Yu had almost zero combat experience. As the battle continued, Xiao Yao and Lu Yu were like sponges, crazily absorbing all knowledge about combat. The speed of their improvement surprised the disciples of the various sections. The talent of these two was not bad. They learned so quickly. Even Xiaoluan couldn't help but reveal a smile as he said, "Not bad. Looks like fighting is the best way to train." Hey. Aren't you worried about your brother? They are about to use their killer moves. Li Suifeng smiled bitterly. Xiaoluan only saw Xiao Yao's improvement, but he didn't care about the changes in the battle. Up until now, the two of them were no longer holding back. Lu Yu and Xiao Yao were planning to use their killer moves at the same time. Hearing Li Suifeng's words, Xiaoluan's gaze changed slightly. At the same time, the two of them on the stage were indeed planning to use their killer moves as Li Suifeng said. Up until now, the two of them had a rough understanding of each other's strength. Xiao Yao was obviously stronger, but it wasn't enough to defeat Lu Yu in a short period of time. As for the two of them, they were too excited to care about anything else. Or perhaps they didn't even think about it. This was the first time they felt the thrill of a battle. Naturally, the two of them couldn't hold back. As they fought, they began to use their killer moves. "Brother Xiao Yao, you're not bad. However, I haven't used my real killer move yet." "Me too. Show me what you've got." "Ha, that's good. Brother Xiao Yao, you have to be careful. In a battle like this, under normal circumstances, one wouldn't use their killer moves. On one hand, there was no need to reveal their strength to the public. On the other hand, once a killer move was used, it would be difficult to stop it. It could easily cause casualties. In an ordinary spar, once there was a casualty, it was obviously not a good result. Therefore, anyone with experience would definitely not use their killing moves in such a spar. However, Xiao Yao and Lu Yu did not care about this at all. Firstly, the two of them were too young and did not realize the danger of doing so. Secondly, because of their status, their characters were a little lawless. After all, there were not many things in the Great Thousand World that could make them afraid. As the top group of second-generation young masters, although they would not take the initiative to bully others, they would not be easily timid either. Therefore, the two of them belonged to the type of people who were extremely daring. As they spoke, the two of them attacked without hesitation. At once, the two of them used their killer moves. Seeing this, the Ziyang House disciple who had been watching the battle frowned and was about to stop them. It was obvious that the power of the two's attacks was not weak. If one of them was not able to stop it, it was very likely that they would be injured. With the strength of these two young masters, it was obvious that they could not control their attacks as they wished. However, just as the Ziyang House disciple was about to stop them, someone was faster than him. In a flash, the figure appeared on the stage and easily neutralized the two's killer moves. At the same time, he blocked the two's killer moves and neutralized them. Seeing that someone had interrupted their battle, Lu Yu and Xiao Yao's faces darkened. At such a crucial moment, someone had interfered. With their character, they naturally would not let it go. Therefore, before they could see clearly who had interfered, Xiao Yao had already shouted angrily. "Who interrupted our battle? Are you looking for death?" At this moment, Xiao Yao did indeed look like a second-generation young master. However, very quickly, just as he finished speaking, a cold voice sounded and instantly stopped Xiao Yao's attack. 17-inch, it's me. Why? Do you want me to die? Along with the voice, Xiao Luan's cold face appeared in front of Xiao Yao. Seeing that it was Xiao Luan who had interfered, Xiao Yao immediately calmed down. At first, he was unhappy, but in the next second, he put on a smile and said, "Sister, why did you, me? What did I do?" "No, nothing." In front of Xiao Luan, Xiao Yao did not have the slightest bit of temper. This sister of hers always used various methods to deal with the two of them. Since young, Xiao Yao had suffered a lot at Xiao Luan's hands. Looking at Xiao Yao's fawning face, Xiao Luan coldly snorted and said, "The battle ends here. Don't make a scene here. If father finds out, you will suffer." The siblings spoke as if there was no one around them, but little did they know that the expressions of the disciples below had changed drastically. Many people knew of Xiao Luan's identity. After all, Xiao Luan was not like Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. She had been a disciple of the sacred palace for a long time and had made a name for herself. Therefore, many people knew that Xiao Luan was the daughter of the sacred palace's sacred master, Xiao Chen. But now, Xiao Yao actually called Xiao Luan's sister. Moreover, this little fellow's surname was Xiao. In this way, Xiao Yao's identity was self-evident. Many people guessed Xiao Yao's identity. Soon, the Purple Sun sect disciple came to Lu Yu's side and bowed to Xiao Luan with cupped fists. "Senior sister Xiao. Junior brother Chen." Xiao Luan looked at him and nodded. She knew junior brother Chen from before. This person was the eldest disciple of the Purple Sun sect and had decent talent. The two nodded as a greeting. Then, junior brother Chen said nervously, "Senior sister Xiao, this junior brother of mine is used to jumping around. He accidentally offended the young master just now." Junior brother Chen could still remain calm if he didn't know Xiao Yao's identity. But now that he knew Xiao Yao's identity, junior brother Chen naturally couldn't pretend that he didn't know. After all, this was Xiao Chen's son. If Xiao Yao held a grudge against him, let alone Lu Yu, the entire Purple Sun sect would be in trouble. Therefore, junior brother Chen chose to step forward. However, before he could finish, Xiao Luan waved her hand and said, "It's just a competition between children. It's nothing. You don't have to take it to heart." Junior brother Chen was relieved when he heard Xiao Luan's words. He then looked at Lu Yu. Originally, he wanted Lu Yu to apologize to Xiao Yao. After all, he really couldn't afford to offend Xiao Yao. However, at this moment, Lu Yu was stunned. It wasn't that he was frightened. It was just that he didn't expect Xiao Yao to be Xiao Chen's son. Moreover, he actually called him a good-for-nothing in front of him. No wonder Xiao Yao was so angry when he heard those words. It turned out that he had scolded Xiao Yao in front of Xiao Luan. After a while, Lu Yu looked at Xiao Yao who was standing beside Xiao Luan. Chapter 2693. Lu Yu didn't expect that he had just scolded Xiao Chen's son. No matter how naive Lu Yu was, he knew that this matter was serious. If Xiao Yao was determined to pursue the matter, then even his father would be implicated. Lu Yu knew the gap between the Purple Sun sect and the Sacred Palace. He also knew that the Purple Sun sect's current strength was all thanks to the Sacred Palace. Therefore, when he looked at Xiao Yao, he didn't know what to say for a moment. The two of them had indeed chatted happily before, but to be honest, the two of them didn't know each other well. Lu Yu also didn't know what Xiao Yao was thinking. But while Lu Yu was in a daze, Xiao Yao took the initiative to speak. "How is it? Am I still trash now?" Lu Yu didn't know how to answer for a moment. He felt that no matter what he said, it would be wrong. However, to Lu Yu's surprise, Xiao Yao suddenly smiled. He patted Lu Yu on the shoulder and said, "Don't call me trash in the future. I'll forget about this matter. However, you have to accompany me when I travel for the first time. I like you very much." Lu Yu nodded his head. With that, Xiao Yao dragged Lu Yu to continue drinking. Seeing this, the corners of Xiao Luan's mouth unconsciously revealed a smile, while junior brother Lu of the Purple Sun sect secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Although he didn't know what exactly happened between Lu Yu and Xiao Yao, if he really angered Xiao Yao, then the matter would be big or small. In the end, everyone was happy. Xiao Yao didn't hold a grudge against Lu Yu, but Xiao Lao was still a little indignant. He made Lu Yu drink a few large cups of wine to apologize, and only then did his expression look a little better. The matter between the younger generation naturally wouldn't attract the attention of Xiao Chen and the others. At least, Xiao Chen didn't know about this matter yet. After a round of drinking, the Sacred Palace's founding ceremony came to an end. However, the crowd didn't leave because tomorrow would be the day when the sacred palace would select the 10 great chosens. Everyone knew what the 10 great chosens represented, and everyone was naturally looking forward to seeing who would become the first batch of chosens. In addition, the sacred palace had also invited everyone to watch the battle, so everyone was naturally happy to stay. The banquet lasted all the way until nightfall before the crowd gradually dispersed. At the same time, Xiao Yao, Xiao Lao, Xiao Luan, and the other juniors did the same. After all, Xiao Luan and the others still had to prepare for the selection of the 10 saints tomorrow. After returning to his residence, Xiaochen dispelled the smell of alcohol in his body. At this moment, Qin Shuru walked over with a cup of tea. He handed it to Xiaochen and said with a chuckle, "Your son caused trouble today." "Oh? Who did you offend?" Xiaochen asked curiously. He wasn't worried. After all, his father had the ability to settle everything for Xiao Yao. At least in the vast 1,000 domains, there was no matter or person that Xiaochen couldn't settle. Xiaochen was just curious. Although Xiao Yao was a little mischievous, he would not make enemies for no reason. He had never heard of Xiao Yao bullying someone weaker than him. This was the first time something like this had happened. In response to Xiao Chen's question, Qin Shuru recounted everything that had happened. Qin Shuru even told Xiaochen that Lu Yu had called him a good-for-nothing in front of Xiao Yao. It wasn't difficult for Qin Shuru to find out about these things. However, after hearing Qin Shuru's words, Xiaochen didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed loudly. "Ha, this kid from the Lu family is a little interesting. He doesn't even know who he is, and he's already bad-mouthing him in front of him." It was obvious that Xiaochen wasn't angry. At the same time, Flower Fairy, who was also walking over, rolled her eyes at Xiaochen and said, "You can still laugh. You're really like father and son. I heard from Luo'er that Yao'er challenged Lu Yu to a battle, but was stopped by Luan Luan. In the end, not only did Yao'er not blame Lu Yu, he even invited him to travel with him in the future. I really don't know if you and your father are stupid. You're simply the stupid son of a landlord." After being ridiculed and called a good-for-nothing, not only did Xiao Yao not get angry, he even took the initiative to invite Lu Yu to travel with him. At first glance, it did seem a little stupid. However, Xiaochen looked at Flower Fairy with a smile in his eyes. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. He asked with a smile, "Do you really think I'm stupid?" Hearing this, Flower Fairy blushed and scolded unhappily, "Stupid, of course I'm stupid. You and your father are the stupidest people in the world. Ha, no matter how stupid I am, I'm still your husband and son." Hearing this, Xiaochen laughed loudly. In the courtyard, Xiaochen wasn't angry because of what happened today. Instead, he was in a good mood. Especially after hearing that Xiao Yao didn't blame Lu Yu, the smile on Xiao Chen's face became even brighter. Was Xiao Yao really stupid? Actually, Xiao Chen, Flower Fairy, and Qin Shuru already knew the answer. Moreover, from the expressions of the three of them, it was obvious that they didn't blame Xiao Yao, let alone Lu Yu. At the same time, in Xiao Yao's room, Xiao Lao looked at his brother unwillingly and asked, "Brother, are you really going to let Lu Yu go just like that? That guy called us good for nothing. Then what do you want to do?" Hearing this, Xiao Yao, who was lying lazily on the bed and eating the spiritual fruit in his hand, asked casually, "We should at least catch him and beat him up." Xiao Lao, who didn't know what his brother was thinking, replied angrily without thinking too much. With Xiao Luo's personality, he naturally didn't want to give up so easily. However, because of the young man's pure heart, he didn't want to kill Lu Yu. He just wanted to teach him a lesson. However, hearing Xiao Lao's words, Xiao Yao smiled and shook his head. Seeing this, Xiao Lao immediately asked unhappily, "Brother, what are you laughing at? Did I say something wrong?" "Not really. But let me ask you, is it better to have one more friend or one more enemy in this world?" "Of course it's a friend." Then what do you think it will be to the two of us if he says a few words about us?" At this point, Xiao Lao hesitated. Seeing that Xiao Lao didn't get the main point, Xiao Yao suddenly stood up and looked at his brother with shining eyes. His eyes were filled with strong confidence. "Brother, Lu Yu is a good guy. Although he is a little outspoken, he is worth befriending. That's why I've forgiven him. Of course, the most important reason is that I want to recruit him and make him work for me." Right now, Xiao Yao is like a completely different person compared to his usual self. Who would have thought that Xiao Yao, who had always been mischievous, could actually say something like this? But hearing this, Xiao Luo still asked in confusion. "Brother, why do you want to recruit him? He's so weak. He's not even as strong as the outer disciples of our sacred palace." Chapter 2694. Xiao Lao didn't understand what his brother was thinking. In his opinion, Lu Yu was so weak, there was no point in recruiting him. It would be better to recruit a few outer sect disciples. Xiao Lao didn't understand what his brother was thinking. In his opinion, Lu Yu was so weak, there was no point in recruiting him. It would be better to recruit a few outer sect disciples. Seeing that Xiao Lao still didn't understand what he meant, Xiao Yao patted Xiao Lao's head helplessly and scolded, "Forget it, you won't understand even if I tell you. Just remember not to find trouble with Lu Yu in the future, or else I'll teach you a lesson." "Okay." Hearing this, Xiao Lao nodded obediently. Then, seeing his brother lying on the bed again, he went to bed as well. The two brothers didn't realize that Xiao Chen's figure was hidden in the darkness outside the door. Watching the two brothers fall asleep, Xiao Chen's smile became brighter and brighter. Since they were young, Xiao Yao's personality was the most lively, but also the most intelligent. He was like a wild horse out of control. Xiao Lao, on the other hand, was honest and reliable. He had a strong dependence on his brother and listened to everything his brother said. Originally, Xiao Chen was worried that Xiao Yao's personality would be too extreme in the future and thus go astray. But now, it seemed that he was overthinking. Being able to understand these things at such a young age already made Xiao Chen very satisfied. Looking at the two little guys' room with a gentle gaze, Xiao Chen laughed and scolded, "Little bastard, you want to build your own team now? Do you have your eyes on Lu Yu, or the Purple Sun sect?" "Ha!" Following his words, Xiao Chen's figure disappeared without a sound. He didn't attract anyone's attention. Xiao Chen was very satisfied with Xiao Yao's performance. On the other side, the same scene was playing out. In the residence of the Purple Sun Martial School, Lu Yu and his father were still awake. They had heard the whole story from Lu Yu, including how Xiao Yao forgave him and invited him to travel with her. Lu Yu's father said with a complicated look on his face, What do you think of Xiao Yao?" Not bad, he's broad-minded. He's able to forgive me after I ridiculed him to his face. He's also very strong. He's a very powerful person." Upon hearing his father's question, Lu Yu answered truthfully. He didn't even realize that when he said these words, Lu Yu's eyes unconsciously revealed a touch of admiration. It was only the first time they met, but Lu Yu already admired Xiao Yao. It was obvious that Xiao Chen was a capable person. Of course, Lu Yu himself didn't realize this point. However, Lu Yu's father saw everything clearly. He let out a sigh of relief and said to Lu Yu, "Well, that's all for now. Since you've forgiven him, the Holy Lord shouldn't continue to pursue the matter. You can go back and rest." Watching Lu Yu leave, Lu Yu's father murmured softly, "Like father, like son. But it's also good. You won't be at a disadvantage if he follows him. The matters of the young people should be left to them." Lu Yu's father was a shrewd old man. Naturally, it was easy for him to see through Xiao Yao's thoughts. In fact, Xiao Yao's move wasn't very clever. But even if you knew, what could you do? Moreover, Xiao Yao was able to be so broad-minded at her age. This was the most important thing. If it were anyone of the same age, they wouldn't forgive Lu Yu without any grudges like Xiao Yao. Of course, Xiao Yao also received Lu Yu's gratitude and admiration. These two emotions would easily turn into loyalty in the future. Chapter 5. It was a silent night. the matter between Xiao Yao and Lu Yu didn't spread in the sacred palace. After all, not many people paid attention to it. However, Xiaochen directly called Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao to him for the second question. Today, you two will come with me to watch the battle and witness the birth of the 10 chosen. Hearing this, the two boys were stunned. After all, this seemed to be the first time Xiaochen had asked them to attend together. Otherwise, their identities wouldn't have remained unknown until now. Seeing the puzzled look on the two boys' faces, Xiaochen didn't say much. He called Qin Shuru and the other girls and led the two boys directly to the battle arena. The Sacred Palace's martial arts competition was held in a special small world. The chosen saint selection would be held in the small world of the battle arena. Here, everyone could fight to their heart's content without worrying about creating any impression. The spectator stands had already been set up long ago, and the experts of the various major factions had also arrived. However, the central spectator's stand was empty because it belonged to Xiao Chen and the other ancestors. However, no one knew if Jun Wuya, Dao Xiong and the other ancestors would come today, but Xiao Chen would definitely come. As time passed, it didn't take long for Xiao Chen and his family to appear in the central spectator's stand. The two boys, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao, naturally followed Xiao Chen. When they saw Xiao Chen appear, everyone bowed one after another. However, when many people looked at Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao, their eyes flashed with confusion and shock. Clearly, many people had guessed something, and Xiao Chen was straightforward this time. After waving his hand, he said with a smile, "Everyone, there's no need to be so polite. These are my two good-for-nothing sons, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. I hope that everyone will take care of them in the future." Xiao Chen straightforwardly revealed the identities of the two boys. When they heard that Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were Xiao Chen's two mysterious sons, the gazes of everyone present changed. These two were the two second-generation sons with the most powerful backgrounds in the Great Thousand World. However, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were clearly not used to such a scene. In response, Xiao Chen said with a smile, "You can go over there and watch. I don't think you'll like it if you stay with us old fellows," Xiao Chen said as he pointed at a small spectator's stand in the distance. Hearing this, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao nodded. However, Xiao Yao did not go directly to the spectator's stand. Instead, she went to the spectator's stands of the 6 great sects, including the Purple Sun sect. First, she bowed to Lu Yu's father and the other elders, then she said to Lu Yu, "Lu Yu, come over there with me. We'll have company." Xiao Yao took the initiative to invite Lu Yu again. Naturally, Lu Yu would not reject her. Then, Xiao Yao looked at the other young people and said with a smile, "If you're willing, you can come along too." Soon, under Xiao Yao's invitation, the group of young people occupied the small spectator stand. These people were the second-generation sons of the 6 great sects, and their backgrounds were almost the same as Lu Yu's. They were either the young lords of the 6 great sects, or the disciples of the higher-ups. Seeing the two brothers, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao, chatting and drinking together in a lively atmosphere, the corner of Xiao Chen's mouth also revealed a trace of a smile, thinking to himself, "Little brats." Chapter 2695. After jokingly scolding, Xiao Chen no longer paid attention to the matters of Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. However, in his heart, he secretly decided that the training of these two brats should also be put on the agenda. After jokingly scolding, Xiao Chen no longer paid attention to the matters of Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. However, in his heart, he secretly decided that the training of these two brats should also be put on the agenda. However, he had to wait until the Sacred Palace's matters were over. Moreover, the vast thousand world was basically in a stable state and there wouldn't be too much danger. Xiao Chen wasn't too worried about the two brats training in the vast thousand world. Xiao Chen had specially brought Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao over. On the other side, the higher-ups of the 6 great sects, including the Purple Sun sect, had complicated looks in their eyes as they watched the group of juniors chatting happily with Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. However, they didn't step forward to say anything. Soon, the first chosen selection of the Sacred Palace officially began under the auspices of several Sacred Palace elders. There were many applicants for the chosen selection this time, but there were only 100 people left after the previous round of elimination. The first batch of Sacred Palace's 10 great chosen would be selected from these 100 people. These 100 people were the best among the disciples of the 5 sects of the Sacred Palace. Among them, the 10 great blade disciples, the 10 great sword fanatics, and the 10 great moonlight disciples were naturally among them. However, there was one thing worth mentioning. Among the 10 great chosen, 2 spots were specially reserved for the Alchemy School and the Talisman School. In other words, at least 2 of the chosen had to be from the Alchemy School and the Talisman School. This was also in consideration of the special characteristics of the Alchemy School and the Talisman School. After all, the disciples of these 2 schools were alchemists and talisman masters. The Talisman School was fine because they could rely on the power of their talismans to contend with the disciples of the other 3 schools. However, the combat strength of the Alchemy School's disciples was obviously not as good. However, there was nothing he could do about it. After all, their paths were different. The disciples of the Alchemy School knew how to concoct pills. This was their biggest advantage, and it was also very useful. Therefore, in order to ensure the integrity of the 10 saints, Xiaochen forcefully took out 2 spots and gave them to the Alchemy School and the Talisman School. Otherwise, with the combat strength of the Alchemy School's disciples, it was estimated that no one would be able to enter the ranks of the 10 saints. Of course, if it was a competition of alchemy, then it would be another situation, but this was obviously impossible. In fact, there were only 8 spots left among the 10 great holy sons. As a result, the competition was naturally even more intense. The battle arena had been prepared. For the selection of the 10 chosen this time, the Sacred Palace would be using a round-robin battle system and a point system. Each of the 100 disciples would have to fight against the other 99 disciples. If they won, they would gain 1 point. If they lost, they would not gain any points. When all the battles were over, the top 8 disciples would become the 10 holy sons. Everyone would have to go through 99 battles. Therefore, in order to save time, the Sacred Palace had also prepared 10 arenas for the battles to be held at the same time. This way, they could save a lot of time. Without much nonsense, under the guidance of several elders, the disciples stepped onto their respective arenas one after another. The first round of the competition began. Xiaochen and the others sat on the high platform, watching the selection of the holy sons with their own eyes. Qinshuru and the other girls accompanied Xiaochen. At this time, perhaps because there were no exciting battles, Flower Fairy asked with a smile, "Husband, who do you think has a better chance?" "I think in the end, it will be decided among the 10 sword fanatics." Hearing this, Xiaochen replied with a smile. Although there were 100 disciples participating in the selection, in Xiaochen's opinion, in the end, only the 30 sword fanatics, saber disciples, and moonlight disciples had a chance to become the holy sons. After all, the gap between them and the ordinary disciples was not small. They were also the ones most likely to become the holy sons. The other disciples basically did not have much of a chance. Just as Xiaochen had expected, the outcome of the battle in one of the rings had already been decided while Xiaochen was speaking. From the beginning to the end, it had only taken the blink of an eye, and only one move had been used. The winner was a saber disciple from the Saber Gate. His opponent was a personal disciple from the Moon Gate. Unfortunately, even though he was a personal disciple, there was still an extremely obvious gap between him and the saber disciple. He could not even take a single move from the saber disciple. Seeing that the winner had already been decided, Flower Fairy smiled and said, "Husband, who do you think will win?" Flower Fairy also agreed with Xiaochen's words. The other disciples were indeed not qualified to compete with these saber disciples and sword fanatics. Hearing this, Xiaochen smiled and said, "It's hard to say. Don't worry, just watch and you will know." It was hard to say who would win and who would lose in the end. However, these battles were meaningless to Xiaochen and the others and did not pique their interest at all. On the other hand, the experts from the various major forces were watching the battles in the arenas with unsatisfied expressions. The strength of the Sacred Palace disciples was not bad. At least among the 100 disciples, the lowest cultivation level was at the comprehension realm. The comprehension realm. If placed in other sects, one could be an elder-level figure. Even the leaders of some small sects were at the comprehension realm. Inviting experts from various major forces to witness the selection of the 10 holy sons, there was no lack of Sacred Palace's intention to show their strength to the outside world. After all, the strength of the disciples was so strong, there was naturally no need to doubt the strength of the Sacred Palace's higher-ups. Using this method could indeed instill fear in the hearts of the major forces, and from the looks of it, the effect seemed to be quite good. Round after round of battles ended. Just as Xiaochen had expected, the sword fanatic, saber apprentice, and moonlight disciples did not lose, while the other disciples all had their own victories and losses. When the 5th round began, it was finally Xiaowan's turn. As one of the 10 sword fanatic disciples, Xiaowan naturally had the opportunity to compete for the 10 holy sons. Moreover, from her performance, it seemed that she was determined to be one of the 10 holy sons. Seeing Xiaowan enter the arena, 100 Flower Fairy, Qinshuru and the other girls could not help but become excited. After all, this was their daughter. Even Gulingyao, Hongxiu, and Tianyue, who had been listless, became interested and focused on Xiaowan's arena. Xiaowan's opponent was a direct disciple of the Moon Gate. Seeing that her opponent was Xiaowan, the direct disciple could not help but smile bitterly. She knew that she had almost no chance of winning. Compared to Xiaowan, her strength was too weak. Xiaowan was at least in the Dao realm, while she was only in the comprehension realm. With a difference of 1 realm, there was almost no hope for her. The result was the same. Similarly, Xiaowan defeated her opponent with a single move. Seeing this, Gulingyao and Hongxiu could not help but cheer, while Xiaochen said with a speechless face, "Alright, is this something worth celebrating? It's just defeating a direct disciple. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation." Chapter 2696. Gulingyao and Hongxiu cheered excitedly because of Xiaowan's victory. Although the 2 women's identities were no longer the same as before, their personalities hadn't changed much. In this regard, Xiaochen could only helplessly stop them. Gulingyao and Hongxiu cheered excitedly because of Xiaowan's victory. Although the 2 women's identities were no longer the same as before, their personalities hadn't changed much. In this regard, Xiaochen could only helplessly stop them. There were so many people present. What was there to be proud of? Moreover, Xiaowan had defeated a direct disciple of the Moon Gate. Wasn't this all within reason? With Xiaowan's strength, she could be considered one of the top disciples among the sword fanatic, saber apprentice, and moonlight disciples. A mere direct disciple wasn't worth mentioning at all. After being reprimanded by Xiaochen, the 2 women stuck out their tongues and immediately quieted down. The following battles didn't change much from what they had expected. Moreover, no saber apprentice, sword fanatic, or moonlight disciples encountered each other in the early stages. It was as if they were deliberately separated and the battles between the strong were to be carried out later. This was normal. After all, the highlight was always left for the last. Although the battles between the direct disciples were also exciting, Xiaochen knew that these people were basically just bystanders. They had no chance of winning. As time went by, the situation gradually became clearer. The 30 sword disciples, sword maniacs, and moonlight disciples were still in their peak condition. They were the first group, and the remaining people in the second group had wins and losses. There was no one who still had a perfect record. They had deliberately avoided the battles between the strong. In the blink of an eye, a day had passed. During this day, the battles never stopped except for the necessary rest. For Xiaochen and the others, a day wasn't considered tiring. After all, everyone present was strong. Let alone a day, Even if they didn't sleep or rest for a year, they wouldn't feel the slightest discomfort. Moreover, while watching the battles, the sacred palace also prepared a lot of good wine and food for everyone. It wasn't boring to watch the battles while chatting and drinking. As a matter of fact, Xiaochen was now sitting with Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others. Everyone was drinking and chatting. Xiaochen looked at Dan Xian and Chu Ming and smiled. "How is it? Have the two sects chosen yet?" The Pill Alliance and the Talisman Gate had two fixed chosen saints. Naturally, the two sect leaders were in charge of selecting the candidates. Hearing this, Dan Xian and Chu Ming smiled and replied, "It's already been confirmed. We can announce it after the competition." "That's good." If there were no disciples from the Alchemy School and the Talisman School among the 10 Holy Sons, then they were obviously not authoritative. Therefore, the Alchemy School and the Talisman School had to occupy at least 2 seats. While the Talisman Sects competition and Talisman. As they chatted, more than half of the battles were over. It could be said that the seeded contestants were almost confirmed. Now, only the 30 people in the first group still had hope of becoming one of the 10 saints. Even if the others won all their matches, there was no hope for them. The situation was very clear. The battle of the 30 seeded contestants was about to begin. It was the time to determine who the 10 saints belonged to. Bobo. In the competition area, Xiao Luan, Qin Kunlun, Li Suifeng, Lu Qingyao, Wang Menglin, and the others gathered together. They had won all their matches so far. After all, it was difficult for the personal disciples to pose a threat to them. But at this time, Wang Menglin said helplessly, "I don't think there's any hope." Wang Menglin felt that there was no hope for her. After all, judging from everyone's battles, Wang Menglin didn't think that her strength could rank in the top 8. Aside from Qin Kunlun, Li Suifeng, and the others, there were also quite a few disciples among the 10 great saber disciples and the 10 great moonlight disciples who had extraordinary combat strength, surpassing Wang Menglin. There were only 8 spots left among the 10 great saints. It would be very difficult to stand out among the 30 people. Moreover, Wang Menglin was very clear that her strength was below average among the 30 seeded contestants. It could even be said that she was at the bottom. Her chances were naturally not great. Hearing this, Lu Qingyao smiled and said, "I don't think I have a chance either. It's up to the 3 of you." Lu Qingyao also thought that she didn't have a great chance. Moreover, in her opinion, among the 10 great sword fanatics, only 3 people had a chance of becoming one of the 10 saints. They were Qin Kunlun, Li Suifeng, and Xiao Luan. Needless to say, Qin Kunlun and Li Suifeng had always occupied the top 2 positions among the 10 great sword fanatics. Qin Kunlun's strength was obvious to all. He was indeed powerful. On the other hand, Li Suifeng was much more mysterious. He didn't compete with others, but he had always been ranked 2nd. However, Lu Qingyao and the others were very clear that although Li Suifeng had always been ranked 2nd behind Qin Kunlun, it didn't mean that Li Suifeng's strength was inferior to Qin Kunlun's. It was because of Li Suifeng's character that he didn't like to compete with others. Therefore, he had always been ranked 2nd. As for Xiao Luan, although Xiao Luan didn't reveal much in the past few years, as a close friend, Lu Qingyao still knew some inside information. In recent years, Xiao Luan's speed of improvement had been very fast. It could be said that he was catching up to Qin Kunlun and Li Suifeng. The gap between them should be very small. In addition, Xiao Luan's identity meant that he had a lot more cultivation resources than them. Moreover, Xiao Chen's teachings also gave Xiao Luan a lot of trump cards. Therefore, he was very hopeful. Apart from these 3 people, Lu Qingyao didn't think that anyone else among the 10 great sword fanatics had a chance. After all, the Saber Disciple and Moonlight Disciple weren't weak. Especially the top few people, they were all on par with Qin Kunlun and Li Suifeng. Hearing Lu Qingyao's words, Qin Kunlun didn't answer. Li Suifeng smiled helplessly and said, "Spare me, I don't have the strength of those monsters." Each one of them is heaven-defying. Li Suifeng laughed self-deprecatingly. However, no one believed his words. Just as he finished speaking, the elder's voice sounded. Li Suifeng versus Meng Ma, please come to the stage. The smile on Li Suifeng's face became even more bitter when his name was suddenly called out and he heard that his opponent was Meng Ma. Lu Qingyao and Wang Minglin couldn't help but laugh and tease him. Meng Ma, senior brotherly, you can do it. We believe that you won't lose. Don't embarrass our sword sect. We all believe in you. Chapter 2697. Lu Qingyao and the other girls said to Li Suifeng with smiles on their faces. However, their eyes seemed to be filled with pity for Li Suifeng. However, to be honest, when they heard that Li Suifeng's opponent was actually Meng Ma, they couldn't help but be shocked. This was because Meng Ma was ranked first among the top 10 disciples of the Saber sect. It could be said that Meng Ma was the eldest disciple of the Saber sect. He had the same status as Qin Kunlun in the Sword sect. Moreover, Meng Ma's strength was also extremely strong. Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma had fought before. It was said that the two of them fought fiercely for a day and a night. In the end, Qin Kunlun returned with serious injuries. However, the final result was not announced. Of course, Meng Ma was also seriously injured in that battle. However, there was one thing that could be confirmed. Meng Ma's strength was at least on par with Qin Kunlun's. Everyone in the Sword sect knew Qin Kunlun's strength very well. He was definitely stronger than all the disciples of the Sword sect. Even Xiao Luan didn't dare to say that he could defeat Qin Kunlun. Under the gazes of everyone, Li Suifeng walked up to the arena with a helpless expression. This was the first battle between the seeded contestants so far. Moreover, it was the highlight of the show right from the start. The second disciple of the Sword sect against the first disciple of the Dao sect. Such a battle was definitely enough to attract everyone's attention. Even Song Xing and Dao Ju looked at the arena with great interest. They smiled and said, Li Suifeng and Meng Ma. Interesting. Knowing the attractiveness of this match, naturally, the battle between the two was arranged to be held in the center of the arena. This was the closest arena to the stands, so everyone in the stands could clearly see the normal process of the match. Xiao Chen and the others' gazes fell on the arena where Li Suifeng and Meng Ma were. When they heard Song Xing and Dao Ju's words, Xiao Chen smiled and teased, "Are you sure you did something secretly?" Li Suifeng left a deep impression on Xiao Chen. Until now, Xiao Chen still remembered this disciple. In Xiao Chen's eyes, Li Suifeng was an extremely talented disciple with a very lazy character. He didn't have a utilitarian heart and wasn't competitive. However, his strength was very strong. If Li Suifeng was a little more serious, it would be hard to say who would be the first disciple of the Sword sect. Xiao Chen, Meng Ma. However, it was undeniable that he was also a very strong disciple. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to be the first disciple of the Saber sect's Holy Saint SSS sect. SSS. SSSSS, it's with sect with a sect Xiong Saber. As well shows their faces, he's answers to his to them to be honest. IIIITSSSS me too. Both of them had an innocent look on their faces. Seeing this, Xiao Chen smiled and didn't say anything else. He was just teasing them. Even if the two of them had really planned this, Xiao Chen wouldn't blame them. After all, according to the rules this time, as long as you had true strength, you would definitely be able to become a saint. It didn't matter even if you lost 1 or 2 matches. It could be said that the rules this time were already the fairest method. Xiao Chen smiled and shifted his gaze to the arena. At this moment, Li Suifeng and Meng Ma had already stepped onto the arena. Meng Ma had a smile on his face and his eyes were filled with battle intent. Obviously, Meng Ma was looking forward to this battle and was very excited. However, Li Suifeng was completely different. Although Li Suifeng also had a smile on his face, it felt bitter no matter how one looked at it. Li Suifeng, you refused to fight with me back then. Today, you won't run away, right? Meng Ma smiled as he looked at Li Suifeng. There were some things that outsiders didn't know. After the battle with Qin Kunlun, Meng Ma, who had recovered from his injuries, had specially asked Li Suifeng for a battle, hoping that the two of them could exchange blows. Unfortunately, unlike Qin Kunlun's straightforward agreement, Li Suifeng had refused without hesitation. After that, although Meng Ma wasn't willing to give up, he had tried various methods to force Li Suifeng to fight with him. However, no matter what method he used, Li Suifeng was stubborn and refused to fight with him. This made Meng Ma very unhappy. Those who were familiar with Meng Ma knew that this guy was an out-and-out battle maniac. He especially liked to challenge powerful warriors. Qin Kunlun's strength had gained Meng Ma's recognition, and Li Suifeng was the person that Meng Ma had always wanted to fight. He hadn't succeeded before, but now that he had met Li Suifeng in the Saint selection, Meng Ma didn't think that Li Suifeng would run away. Therefore, he couldn't help but feel a burning desire in his heart. Meng Ma was looking forward to the strength of this mysterious and powerful second disciple of the Sword Sect. However, what Meng Ma hadn't expected was that after hearing his words, Li Suifeng simply looked at the elder beside him and said, Elder, can I surrender?" Li Suifeng had surrendered without even exchanging blows. Upon seeing this, Meng Ma, who had originally been prepared for a big battle, was stunned on the spot. When he came back to his senses, he shouted angrily. "Li Suifeng, what do you mean by this?" "Nothing. It's too tiring to fight with you. It's meaningless. Even if I lose a battle, I should be able to become a saint, right? I can just win it back from someone else," Li Suifeng replied indifferently. Meng Ma was powerful, and it was too tiring to fight with him. This was the reason that Li Suifeng gave. Meng Ma gritted his teeth as he faced Li Suifeng, who had chosen to retreat once again. To a battle maniac like him, fighting represented everything. Meng Ma found it hard to accept that Li Suifeng had repeatedly avoided a battle with him. However, since Li Suifeng had chosen to surrender, Meng Ma had no other choice. He couldn't force a fight. He stared at Li Suifeng with eyes full of hatred. However, just when everyone thought that the battle had come to a dramatic end, and even Li Suifeng was about to turn around and leave, a voice suddenly came from the spectator's stand. "Li Suifeng, you can't surrender in this battle. Not only that, you have to show me your true strength. If you dare to go easy on me, I'll make you sit in the extermination forest for 10 years. As soon as the voice came out, Li Suifeng stopped in his tracks and looked at the spectator stand helplessly. The voice came from Xiaochen. Facing Li Suifeng's gaze, Xiaochen looked back at him with a faint smile. This brat wants to slack off again. However, Xiaochen didn't agree. Furthermore, after all these years, Xiaochen rarely paid attention to his disciples. It was a rare opportunity, and Xiaochen wanted to see how strong Li Suifeng was now. Therefore, there was no way he would surrender. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2698. Li Suifeng's personality was that he liked to slack off. If he could contribute 1% of his strength, he would definitely not contribute 2%. However, this time, Xiaochen wanted to see how much Li Suifeng's strength had grown. Li Suifeng's personality was that he liked to slack off. If he could contribute 1% of his strength, he would definitely not contribute 2%. However, this time, Xiaochen wanted to see how much Li Suifeng's strength had grown. Among the many disciples of the Sacred Palace, Li Suifeng was the most difficult to determine his true strength because he hid it too deeply and was too lazy. Li Suifeng said helplessly, "Holy Lord, don't I even have the right to surrender?" At this point in the battle, there was naturally no lack of people who took the initiative to surrender. Others could surrender, but Li Suifeng couldn't. Xiaochen smiled and said, "Others can, but you can't. Cut the crap and fight to your heart's content. You know the consequences if you dare to slack off." Xiaochen naturally knew Li Suifeng's temper. If he didn't force Li Suifeng to a dead end, Li Suifeng would never use his full strength. With Xiao Chen's request and the fact that there was no room for negotiation, Li Suifeng could only turn around and look at Meng Ma. At the same time, Meng Ma was also overjoyed. He originally thought that he had failed again, but who would have thought that Sir Holy Lord would force Li Suifeng to fight? Furthermore, he had to give it his all. This was exactly what he wanted. Seeing Li Suifeng's lifeless face, Meng Ma smiled and said, "Lord Holy Lord is wise. Ha, I'm being forced to do something beyond my ability." Li Suifeng grinned and sighed softly. He could have avoided a bitter battle by surrendering, but now he was forced into a dead end. He didn't know what Sir Holy Lord was thinking and why he had to force him to fight this lunatic. Li Suifeng didn't understand Xiao Chen's thoughts. In fact, Xiao Chen didn't have any other thoughts. At most, he just wanted to play around and see Li Suifeng's strength. "Holy Lord, you..." Sang Xing gaped, and before he finished his sentence, Xiao Chen interrupted. "Nothing much. I just want to see how strong this kid is. Moreover, this kid has been slacking all day. It's time to give him a beating." As he spoke, Xiao Chen had a faint smile on his face. Seeing this, Sang Xing could only helplessly smile bitterly. Li Suifeng could only blame himself for being unlucky. He couldn't surrender. Furthermore, the sacred master had personally spoken. This battle was naturally unavoidable. Even though Li Suifeng was grumbling in his heart, he couldn't back down now. He had to fight this battle whether he wanted to or not. As their eyes met, Li Suifeng said to Meng Ma unwillingly, "Senior brother Meng, why don't we go through the motions? I'll let you win when the time comes." Surrendering was impossible, but acting was still possible. However, this act required Meng Ma's cooperation. Unfortunately, after hearing Li Suifeng's suggestion, Meng Ma rejected it without even thinking. "Do I need you to let me win? Li Suifeng, don't think about such impossible things. Today, I must fight with you. Show me your full strength. Otherwise, I guarantee that I'll beat you up so badly that even your mother won't recognize you." It was impossible for Meng Ma to act. Hearing this, Li Suifeng didn't say anything else. He really didn't check the almanac when he went out today. The entire world seemed to be filled with malice towards him. As soon as he said that, Meng Ma didn't wait for Li Suifeng's reply. An aura of the Great Circle of the Tao Realm erupted. Great Circle of the Tao Realm? Sensing Meng Ma's aura, the experts present were stunned. Such a cultivation was already catching up to them. If he took another step forward, wouldn't he be able to break through to the End Realm? Wouldn't that mean that Meng Ma was about to have the strength of the elders of the Sacred Palace? Meng Ma's cultivation shocked everyone. However, they were even more shocked after sensing Meng Ma's cultivation and hearing his words. "Li Suifeng, I advise you to stop thinking about slacking off. I won't hold back. If you don't want to be beaten up too badly, you'd better show me your true strength." Okay. "I'm afraid of you. However, I'll say this first. Next time, don't come looking for me." Hearing this, Li Suifeng replied helplessly. Then, an aura that wasn't weaker than Meng Ma's erupted from Li Suifeng's body. They were both at the Great Circle of the Tao Realm. In an instant, everyone couldn't remain calm. This was a monster. Were all the disciples of the Sacred Palace so strong? The experts of the various factions were shocked. Xiao Chen and the other Sacred Palace experts smiled. Below the stage, Qin Kunlun said as if it was natural. "As expected, you also broke through." Qin Kunlun was naturally talking about Li Suifeng. This was because Qin Kunlun's cultivation was the same as Meng Ma's and Li Suifeng's. He was also at the Great Circle of the Tao Realm. Since he had broken through, it wasn't surprising that Li Suifeng had broken through as well. However, just revealing his cultivation realm was enough to shock everyone present. Meng Ma said excitedly, "Ha, Qin Kunlun didn't lie to me. Li Suifeng, you're really strong." Sigh, I knew it was that guy who said it. He really can't control his mouth. Hearing this, Li Suifeng wasn't happy at all. Instead, he sighed. Li Suifeng really didn't want to fight with Meng Ma, but there was no way out now. Meng Ma attacked as soon as he finished speaking. Moreover, he attacked with his full strength. With a thought, a saber appeared in his hand and he fiercely slashed towards Li Suifeng. The power of this saber was terrifying. At least until now, there hadn't been an attack that was comparable to this saber. Facing Meng Ma's saber, Li Suifeng didn't choose to dodge. Since he couldn't dodge, he could only fight back. Li Suifeng's personality was lazy, not cowardly. He unsheathed his sword and slashed at Meng Ma's saber light. In an instant, sword chi gushed out. The power of Li Suifeng's sword wasn't weaker than Meng Ma's. Sword light and blade light violently collided in the air. The terrifying wind seemed to tear everything apart. Fortunately, there was a protective formation around the arena. Otherwise, the collision between the two of them would have affected everyone present. After a head-on collision, neither of them gained the upper hand. Such an outcome shocked many of the disciples present. One had to know that Meng Ma was the #1 saber disciple while Li Suifeng was only #2 among the sword maniac disciples. According to the ranking, Li Suifeng's strength should be weaker than Meng Ma's. However, regardless of cultivation or combat strength, Li Suifeng didn't seem to be weaker than Meng Ma. However, how could such a person only be #2? Or was it because Qin Kunlun, who was #1, was too strong? Many disciples were guessing, but they didn't know the truth of the matter. After a head-on collision, Meng Ma, the battle maniac, was even more excited. Li Suifeng's battle prowess made his eyes light up. This was definitely a worthy opponent. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 2699. Li Suifeng's strength had greatly exceeded Meng Ma's expectations. However, this didn't make Meng Ma timid. On the contrary, it made him even more excited. Meng Ma's power didn't diminish in the slightest. He took a step forward and his figure instantly disappeared from the spot. Immediately after, he slashed his blade at Li Suifeng. In the face of Meng Ma's blade, Li Suifeng didn't back down either. He directly drew his sword and engaged in a fierce battle. The speed and strength of the two were extremely fast. Many of the experts from the various major forces felt ashamed of their inferiority as they watched the battle. This was because they were the experts of the older generation. However, as they watched the fierce battle in the arena, they honestly felt that they wouldn't be a match for the two of them even if they were in the arena. Their combat strength was so strong that it made many of the older generation experts feel that it was inconceivable. Moreover, they were merely disciples of the Sacred Palace, not experts of the Sacred Palace. Compared to the others, Xiaochen appeared very calm. After all, with Xiaochen's cultivation, he naturally wouldn't be shocked by Li Suifeng and Meng Ma's combat strength. In Xiaochen's opinion, the two of them should possess such combat strength. Otherwise, they wouldn't be worthy of being the future chosen of the Sacred Palace. The battle wasn't over yet, but Xiaochen was already certain that Meng Ma and Li Suifeng would definitely be ranked as chosen because of their strength. With such strength, it would be strange if they couldn't be ranked as chosen. In less than 10 breaths of time, the two of them had already exchanged over 100 moves. Their attacks were swift and ruthless. Moreover, it was obvious that the two of them had already brought out their full strength and didn't hold back in the slightest. This was especially true for Li Suifeng. Given his character, it wasn't easy for him to fight Meng Ma to the death. It was probably because of Xiaochen's order. After all, no matter how lazy Li Suifeng was, it was impossible for him to disobey Xiaochen's orders. Up until now, the two of them were evenly matched. It seemed like neither of them could do anything to the other, and neither of them had any advantage over the other. This was also the case when Meng Ma and Qin Kunlun fought. The two of them fought fiercely for 3 days and 3 nights, and in the end, both of them were seriously injured. Although the two of them didn't mention the outcome, many disciples could guess that the two of them had fought to a draw. This was also the result that everyone could accept. However, the current situation clearly didn't allow the two of them to fight for 3 days and 3 nights. It would be too much of a waste of time. Hence, after a fierce battle, Li Suifeng took the initiative to speak. How about you and I decide the winner in a single move? How's about we decide the outcome? A battle, Suifeng suggested. SSSS. A good sound, a S's. SSSSS. Maybe it was because it was troublesome. If he continued fighting with Meng Ma like this, when would there be an end? Why not just be straightforward and decide the outcome with a single move? Hearing Li Suifeng's words, Meng Ma didn't reject. He straightforwardly nodded and agreed. Then, the aura of the two of them continued to rise. It was obvious that they didn't hold back at all. They were prepared to use their strongest attacks to decide the outcome. Their auras continued to rise, and a terrifying aura covered the entire arena. It even spread to the spectator stands. However, facing the aura of the two, Xiaochen only lightly snorted and easily destroyed the aura of the two. It didn't affect the crowd at all. Under everyone's gaze, Li Suifeng and Meng Ma moved at the same time. The two of them appeared at almost the same time, and their strongest attacks fiercely collided. In an instant, the arena was covered by the terrifying shockwaves of the battle. The two of them were instantly swallowed by the attacks, and they disappeared without a trace. Looking at such a terrifying collision on the arena, such an attack was enough to make an End-Realm expert feel threatened. On the main spectator's stand, Dao Ju smiled and asked Xiaochen. Saint Master, who do you think will win? Dao Ju naturally hoped that Meng Ma would win. After all, he was a disciple of their Saber Gate. However, when he heard this, Xiaochen smiled and said, I think it will be a result of both of them being injured. Xiaochen believed that both of them would be injured, and no one would win. As his voice fell, the shockwaves of the battle on the arena slowly dissipated. Meng Ma and Li Suifeng's figures once again appeared in front of the crowd. It was indeed as Xiaochen said. Both of them were heavily injured, and no one had the upper hand. Their clothes were tattered, and there were many wounds on their bodies. Blood continuously flowed out, and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of their mouths. After the head-on collision just now, the two of them had clearly suffered serious injuries. However, neither of them had fallen. His breathing became hurried, but Meng Ma still stared at Li Suifeng. The battle intent in his eyes didn't decrease as he said, again. Before the victor was decided, with Meng Ma's character, he definitely wouldn't stop. Seeing this, Li Suifeng scolded in his heart, what a lunatic. Li Suifeng really didn't want to fight with Meng Ma. If it wasn't because he couldn't, Li Suifeng would have already killed himself. However, even at this stage, Meng Ma still didn't have any intention of letting go. This made Li Suifeng feel helpless. They were already like this, and he still wanted to fight? Did this fellow want to have a life-and-death battle? Thinking back to the last time when Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma were heavily injured, Li Suifeng was speechless. He really didn't understand what these lunatics were thinking. Why did they have to make it seem like there was a life-and-death grudge between them when they were sparring? According to Li Suifeng's words, it was fine if it wasn't too bad. Why bother? They were born from the same roots, so why be in such a hurry to kill each other? However, Meng Ma completely ignored Li Suifeng's thoughts. Li Suifeng didn't have the qualifications to surrender. Therefore, if Meng Ma wanted to fight, Li Suifeng could only risk his life to accompany him. It wasn't hard to imagine that after this battle, he would probably be bedridden for a few days like Qin Kunlun. However, this didn't seem too bad. If he was seriously injured, he wouldn't have to do anything during the period of recuperation. The sect wouldn't arrange any more missions for him. At that time, he could casually find an excuse and say that his injuries were serious. Wouldn't he have to recuperate for a few months? Thinking of this, Li Suifeng's mood improved a lot. This was a good opportunity to slack off. For a moment, Li Suifeng felt that Meng Ma, who was still aggressive, seemed to be more pleasing to the eye. Since he couldn't avoid it, he might as well not do much. At most, he would rest for a few months after the battle. This was also a kind of compensation. Thinking of this, Li Suifeng smiled and said, "It seems that I have to risk my life to accompany you today. Come on." Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2700. Li Suifeng had thought it through. Since he couldn't fight back, he could only think of ways to gain more benefits. After the battle with Meng Ma, he was seriously injured and had at least a few months to rest. Since he couldn't fight back, he could only think of ways to gain more benefits. After the battle with Meng Ma, he was seriously injured and had at least a few months to rest. However, just as Li Suifeng finished speaking, Xiao Chen opened his mouth again. "Okay, that's enough." Li Suifeng's plan naturally fell through when he heard Xiao Chen's words. Although Meng Ma was still full of fighting spirit, he could only choose to stop since Xiao Chen had spoken. Xiao Chen, who was on the high platform, smiled faintly as he watched the two withdraw their auras one after another. The selection of the Son of Saint is not a battle of life and death. Everyone has witnessed the strength of both of you. Let's end it here. As for this battle, it will end in a draw. No points will be awarded. Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't let the two of them fight to the death in the Chosen Saint. There was no need for that. Moreover, with the strength of the two of them, it could be said that they would obtain the position of the Chosen Saint. They didn't lack 1 point, so it was enough to end it here. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Meng Ma was somewhat unwilling, but he had no choice but to obey. Li Suifeng, on the other hand, looked at the stands with a gloomy face. He was suspicious in his heart. Could it be that the sacred leader had guessed his thoughts again, so he stopped the competition? Originally, he wanted to use his injuries to recuperate for a few months after this battle, but now it seemed that this idea was obviously unrealistic. After stopping, Meng Ma looked at Li Suifeng and said faintly, "Li Suifeng, let's fight again next time." Hearing this, the corners of Li Suifeng's mouth unconsciously twitched. "Next time? Don't worry, I won't give you such a chance again. I'll eat too much of a lunatic like you before I fight with you again." Li Suifeng completely ignored Meng Ma. He turned around and walked down the arena. After this battle, Li Suifeng had already told himself that he absolutely could not have too much contact with this crazy Meng Ma. This guy was a battle maniac. His mind was filled with fighting. It was too tiring and too dangerous to be with such a person. Li Suifeng was a person who liked to adapt to circumstances, so he and Meng Ma were destined not to be together. It was time for them to part ways. The two of them walked down the ring one after another. Soon, the disciples of the alchemy school came to treat their injuries. Because of Xiao Chen's timely intervention, the two of them didn't suffer too serious injuries. They looked quite miserable. However, they were basically just superficial wounds. These injuries were not serious. As long as they were treated, it would not affect the upcoming battle. The battle continued. However, after the battle between Li Suifeng and Meng Ma, the spectators no longer had much interest in the other battles. Even Xiao Chen was the same, but he didn't leave. Instead, he chatted with everyone. However, soon, another pair of seated contestants went up. This time, it was actually Xiao Luan's battle. Her opponent was actually Lu Qingyao. The two women were arranged to fight in the same battle. When they heard their names, Xiao Luan and Lu Qingyao were both stunned. They looked at each other. Lu Qingyao smiled helplessly and said, "It seems that my luck is really bad today." Lu Qingyao knew Xiao Luan's strength. She also knew that she was not Xiao Luan's opponent. Perhaps in the past, Lu Qingyao could suppress Xiao Luan. However, after all these years, Xiao Luan's progress could be described as simply terrifying. She chased after Xiao Luan and now surpassed Lu Qingyao. They had fought in private before. Lu Qingyao was not Xiao Luan's opponent at all. Hearing this, Xiao Luan smiled and replied, "You already know before the battle. This is not like you. Lu Qingyao was not a person who gave up easily. Xiao Luan was very clear about this. After saying this, the two women went up the arena one after another. Seeing Xiao Luan's appearance, Qin Shuru, 100-Flower Fairy and the other women were also suddenly interested. From the beginning to the end, the women were absent-minded, including the battle between Li Suifeng and Meng Ma. However, as soon as Xiao Luan appeared, the women seemed to have come back to life. Looking at the contrast between the women before and after, Xiaochen smiled and shook her head. These women are really, in the middle of the arena. Xiao Luan and Lu Qingyao stood opposite each other. Lu Qingyao originally wanted to surrender directly. After all, she had no intention of competing with Xiao Luan for the position of the Holy Sun. Moreover, she knew that she wasn't Xiao Luan's opponent. However, before Lu Qingyao spoke, Xiao Luan spoke first. Surrendering without a battle isn't your style. Xiao Luan didn't want Lu Qingyao to surrender. In response, Lu Qingyao opened her mouth but didn't say anything. Instead, she chose to fight. Knowing Xiao Luan's personality, Lu Qingyao also knew what Xiao Luan was thinking. So be it if Xiao Luan didn't want to surrender. Besides, she hadn't fought with Xiao Luan for a long time and this was a good opportunity to see how much Xiao Luan's strength had improved. As soon as the elder gave the command, the two of them attacked instantly. Even though their might wasn't as powerful as Li Suifeng and Meng Ma, it wasn't too far off. On the spectator stand, Gu Lingyao asked Xiaochen, "Hubby, can Luan win?" She seemed rather nervous. Upon hearing Gu Lingyao's words, Xiaochen smiled. This woman is so worried that she can't even see the difference in strength between them. Xiaochen glanced at the two of them on the arena and said, "Don't worry, Luan will win." Even though the two of them seemed to be on par with each other and their cultivation was at the minor completion Dao realm, which was one realm lower than Li Suifeng and Meng Ma, Xiaochen could tell that Xiao Luan's strength was above Lu Qingyao's. Moreover, this little girl had purposely suppressed her cultivation. That's right, Xiao Luan had purposely suppressed her cultivation. Her true cultivation wasn't at the minor completion Dao realm but at the great completion Dao realm. In the situation where there was a difference in cultivation, Lu Qingyao had no chance of winning. Needless to say, Xiao Luan's combat strength was above Lu Qingyao's. After exchanging several hundred moves, the two of them were fighting back and forth. It seemed like they were on par with Li Suifeng and Meng Ma. This battle was indeed exciting. However, Xiao Luan was relaxed throughout the battle. On the other hand, Lu Qingyao had already gone all out. Lu Qingyao knew that Xiao Luan didn't like people to go easy on her. Since she had already made her move, Lu Qingyao didn't hold back either. After an intense battle, Lu Qingyao smiled helplessly. "I told you that I'm no match for you." There was a hint of coquettishness in her words. Upon hearing that, Xiao Luan smiled and replied, "But you've improved a lot. It's hard for me to defeat you in the same realm." "Of course, I'm not slacking off." Lu Qingyao smiled happily after being praised by Xiao Luan. However, she knew that Xiao Luan had never shown her true strength. She didn't even know that Xiao Luan's cultivation had already broken through to the great completion Dao realm like Li Suifeng and the rest. Chapter 2701. The battle between Xiao Luan and Lu Qingyao looked exciting, but there was no suspense in the end. Xiao Luan was obviously stronger than Lu Qingyao. Lu Qingyao had almost no chance of winning. After a fierce battle, Xiao Luan decided to end the battle. In an instant, Xiao Luan's aura skyrocketed and quickly broke through the Dao realm minor perfection and reached the Dao realm great perfection. Lu Qingyao was stunned when she felt Xiao Luan's aura. She then smiled bitterly and said, "You broke through to the Dao realm great perfection?" "I just broke through a few days ago." Xiao Luan smiled. Xiao Luan's cultivation had indeed just broken through. Compared to Li Suifeng, Meng Ma, and Qin Kunlun, it was still a little unstable. Obviously, it had not completely stabilized. However, even so, Xiao Luan was still confident of victory. Xiaochen, who was on the spectator's stand, smiled faintly when he saw Xiao Luan unleashing the great perfection of the Dao realm. He knew from the start that Xiao Luan would not lose this battle. Moreover, with Xiao Luan's strength, the saint's position was already in the bag. Xiaochen was pleased to see his daughter's strength. His 3 children were all pretty good. Xiao Luan was needless to say. Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were still young, but they had gradually shown their outstanding side. This was obviously the result that Xiaochen wanted to see the most. The final result was needless to say. Xiao Luan, who had used all of her strength, quickly ended the competition. However, the result of the competition between the 2 girls was different from that of Li Suifeng and Meng Ma. Neither of them was injured. Following the end of Xiao Luan and Lu Qingyao's battle, the battles between the seeded contestants broke out one after another and began to determine the winner. This time, the selection of the Holy Sun had basically come to an end. Other than the seeded contestants, the other disciples had no chance. As the battles continued, the gap between the seeded contestants gradually widened. For example, Li Suifeng, Meng Ma, Qin Kunlun, and Xiao Luan in the first tier were obviously stronger than the other seeded contestants. The battles began and ended one after another. Qin Kunlun met Li Suifeng again, but this time, Li Suifeng didn't even enter the arena and surrendered immediately. My injuries are too severe. I surrender. Li Suifeng said heartlessly as he stood below the arena. After he finished speaking, he did not give Qin Kunlun a chance to reply. He immediately turned around and left, as if he was afraid that Qin Kunlun would drag him up the arena if he stayed for even a second longer. Qin Kunlun was taken aback. Then, he smiled bitterly. And Xiaochen on the spectator's stand. And 2. Li Suifeng wanted to slack off, but Xiaochen didn't give him the chance. Hearing this, Zhang Xing was stunned for a moment, then he smiled bitterly and nodded in agreement. Increasing the number of missions by 3 times meant that Li Suifeng probably wouldn't have any time to rest for a long time. This was obviously very uncomfortable for someone like him, but he had no choice. This was Xiaochen's personal order. Zhang Xing could only obey. Qin Kunlun easily obtained a point from Li Suifeng. After that, Xiao Luan, Meng Ma and the others also fought a few more rounds. Speaking of which, Xiao Luan's battle record was not bad. Until now, he had only lost 3 rounds. He had lost to Qin Kunlun, Meng Ma and Li Suifeng respectively. As for the others, Xiao Luan had won all of them. With this kind of battle record, he could basically confirm his position as the Holy Sun. However, there was still another important match to follow, and that was Qin Kunlun versus Meng Ma. Perhaps to give Meng Ma enough time to recover, the elders arranged for their battle to be the last one. By the time Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma fought, the positions of the 10 great Holy Suns had been completely confirmed. Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma were naturally among them, and the outcome of their battle wouldn't affect the final result in the slightest. Regardless of who won or lost in the end, it wouldn't affect their position as the 10 great Holy Suns. In such a situation, if it were Li Suifeng, he would probably admit defeat without even thinking about it. However, Qin Kunlun's character was clearly different from Li Suifeng's. Even though this match wouldn't affect the final result, Qin Kunlun still had no intention of giving up. He didn't even have any intention of going easy on Meng Ma. The fighting spirit in Qin Kunlun's eyes continued to gather as he watched Meng Ma walk up the arena. His aura also continued to rise. Compared to Li Suifeng, Qin Kunlun's desire to win was even stronger. He, Qin Kunlun, could not do something like giving up without a fight. Similarly, as a battle maniac, Meng Ma's battle intent was also awe-inspiring when facing Qin Kunlun. In the entire sacred palace, there weren't many people that Meng Ma was interested in, and Qin Kunlun was definitely the number one. Moreover, the 2 of them were old rivals, but they still couldn't determine a victor. This could be considered a knot in their hearts. Are your injuries healed? I don't want to take advantage of you, Qin Kunlun said plainly while looking at Meng Ma. Upon hearing this, Meng Ma replied without any hesitation. It's just some flesh wounds. Don't worry. That's good. Qin Kunlun wasn't willing to take advantage of Meng Ma. On the spectator's stand, Xiaochen chuckled as he watched the two of them about to fight. These two brats are interesting. It should be a fierce battle. Yes. In fact, in terms of strength, Li Suifeng shouldn't be weaker than the two of them. It's a pity that Li Suifeng's character. But Qin Kunlun is different from Li Suifeng. He has a strong desire to win, so this should be an exciting battle, Dan Xian said after hearing Xiao Chen's words. Qin Kunlun had a strong desire to win, so he wouldn't admit defeat easily. In fact, ever since he became the leader of the top 10 sword fanatics, it seemed that Qin Kunlun had never admitted defeat. Even after meeting Meng Ma, both of them ended in a draw. Qin Kunlun had never been defeated before. This was the final battle of the Holy Sun selection, and it was probably the most exciting battle. Everyone present watched the upcoming battle with great interest. Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma could be said to be the two strongest disciples of the Sacred Palace. They were about to draw a perfect conclusion to this Holy Sun selection. Everyone was looking forward to the outcome of this final battle. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 2702. Using Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma's battle as the final battle was definitely the best choice. The two of them indeed lived up to expectations. As soon as they made their moves, they brought about a wonderful battle for everyone present. Using Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma's battle as the final battle was definitely the best choice. The two of them indeed lived up to expectations. As soon as they made their moves, they brought about a wonderful battle for everyone present. When two people who would never admit defeat clashed, the result would definitely be extremely shocking. Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma were such people. Neither of them would easily admit defeat, so the battle could be said to be extremely exciting. On the stage, the two fought head-on without the slightest hesitation, making the crowd's blood boil. However, there was one exception, and that was Li Suifeng. Standing below the stage with Xiao Luan and the others, watching the fierce battle between Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma, Li Suifeng said, "Fighting and killing all day is so boring. Sigh, these people just don't know how to enjoy life." Li Suifeng definitely didn't like fighting and killing. Hearing this, Xiao Luan rolled her eyes at him and said, "Your temperament, Li Suifeng's temperament often made people feel helpless." He was clearly very strong, but he was willing to be muddle-headed all day. Many times, when they went on missions together, Li Suifeng would slack off whenever he could. In any case, Li Suifeng would never take the initiative to put in more effort unless it was necessary. Of course, Li Suifeng didn't care at all about the merits. Hearing Xiao Luan's words, Li Suifeng shrugged. He thought to himself, fighting and killing is indeed meaningless. The final battle between Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma could be said to be extremely exciting. The two of them fought until the sky darkened, and this time, Xiaochen didn't say anything to stop them. In any case, this was the last round of the selection. Even if Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma were seriously injured and unconscious, it did not matter. Moreover, with their personalities, even if they were asked to stop, they would not be willing to do so. Since that was the case, it was better to let them fight freely. Of course, many people present also wanted to know who was stronger between Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma. From the beginning of the selection until now, everyone could see that Qin Kunlun and Meng Ma represented the top combat strength of the many Sacred Palace disciples. Whichever of the two was stronger would be the first sacred son of the Divine Palace. However, as the battle between the two continued, many people discovered that it would not be easy for the two of them to determine a victor. Up until now, the two of them had actually suffered quite a bit of injuries. However, there was still no sign of a victor emerging from the battle. In the stands, Zhang Xing looked at the two people fighting fiercely. He asked worriedly, "Holy Master, should we stop them?" "There's no need. Just let these two little fellows fight without restraint. This is the final battle. Even if they get injured, it doesn't matter, Xiaochen said indifferently. What was the point of stopping the two of them? Wasn't it better to let them fight to their heart's content? Neither of them could do anything to the other. In fact, from the looks of it, they seemed to have forgotten that this was the Sacred Sun selection. At this moment, only the other party in the battle were left in their eyes. The battle lasted for an entire day and night, but the final result was that both of them were seriously injured and unconscious. However, although both of them were injured in the end and the battle ended in a draw, the battle between Qin Kunlun and Mengma still amazed everyone present. Many of the older generation experts even felt that even with their strength, they probably did not have much of a chance of winning against Qin Kunlun or Mengma. They could not help but sigh. It was true that each new generation surpassed the previous. The young people nowadays were really more terrifying than the previous. With the end of the final battle, it also meant that the Sacred Palace Sacred Sun selection this time was also over, and the 10 Sacred Palace Sacred Suns were finalized. Although the 10 Sacred Suns had been decided, this did not mean that the list of Sacred Suns would remain unchanged. If someone surpassed them in the future, they would naturally be able to replace them. This was also a rule of the Sacred Palace to encourage competition between the disciples. One could not be content with the status quo. Otherwise, everything one had now would very likely be taken over by others in the near future. After the selection, Xiaochen, as the Sacred Palace Master, naturally personally announced the list of the 10 Sacred Suns. Seeing the 10 Sacred Suns being announced, a burst of enthusiastic cheers broke out. The 10 Sacred Suns had very high status, comparable to the sect masters of the 5 sections. Moreover, they could also receive a lot of resources from the Sacred Palace. It could be said that if the 10 Sacred Suns did not fall or encounter any accidents, they would soon become famous experts in the vast thousand world. Moreover, after personally watching the chosen saint selection this time, the experts from the various major powers clearly knew that they could not treat the 10 great chosens as ordinary juniors. This was because their strength was already close to or even surpassed many experts of the older generation. Although they could not be considered to have truly matured, their wings were already growing. Coupled with the powerful backing of the Sacred Palace, the future achievements of the 10 Sacred Suns were difficult for many to imagine. However, they should be able to reach the Ancestor Realm. After all, their talent was there for all to see. The 10 Sacred Suns were finally decided. In this way, the Sacred Palace could be considered to have been truly established. It would replace the Sword Sect and become the true overlord of the vast thousand world. Like the Immortal Palace and the Cloud Palace, it ruled over a part of the universe. Although the current Sacred Palace might not be comparable to the Immortal Palace and the Cloud Palace, it was believed that the Sacred Palace would quickly grow in the future. When the time came, it would grow into a powerful force that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Immortal Palace and the Cloud Palace. Everyone was jubilant. That night, a lively banquet was naturally unavoidable. Xiaochen also personally participated in this banquet. What Xiaochen did not expect was that during the banquet, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao actually gathered more than half of the people around them. Moreover, they all seemed to follow Xiao Yao's lead. These people were not only disciples of the Sacred Palace, but also the younger generation from the other major forces. At the same time, their identities were not simple. They were basically the future successors of the various major forces and were famous second generations in the vast thousand world. With the group of second generations gathered together, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao clearly became the leaders of this group. Seeing that the two little guys were surrounded by people like him, Xiaochen smiled and did not pay too much attention to them. These two little guys were still far from being able to truly grow up. Not to mention their father, there was still a huge gap between them and their sister, Xiao Luan. However, there was no hurry. After all, Xiaochen did not lack time. There was still a lot of time left for the two little guys to truly grow up. When the time came, they would be able to take charge of things on their own, or become outstanding cultivators who could share their father's burdens. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 2703. With the confirmation of the 10 chosen, the founding ceremony of the sacred palace could be considered to have come to an end. However, the powerful strength that the sacred palace had displayed was still fresh in the minds of the experts from the various great forces. With the confirmation of the 10 chosen, the founding ceremony of the sacred palace could be considered to have come to an end. However, the powerful strength that the sacred palace had displayed was still fresh in the minds of the experts from the various great forces. This was a powerful force that they had never dared to imagine. It was also a powerful force that had never appeared in the history of the vast thousand world. The founding of the sacred palace had fundamentally changed the entire structure of the vast thousand world. Moreover, during this founding ceremony, Shaochen had also found an opportunity to gather with the sect masters of the various great forces to discuss some matters. Of course, the main topic was related to the future of the vast thousand world. According to Shaochen, although the sacred palace was the overlord of the vast thousand world and fully deserved to be called the master, the sacred palace would not enslave or order the various great forces around. From the sacred palace's point of view, the vast thousand domains still needed to flourish. Therefore, the sacred palace usually did not participate in the internal affairs of the various great forces, and the sacred palace would not casually intervene in the internal struggles of the vast thousand domains. Of course, there was naturally a set of rules that belonged to the vast thousand world, and the one who made these rules was the sacred palace. As long as the various great forces were within the scope of the rules, the sacred palace would not stop them. Of course, once the bottom line was crossed, it would be a different matter. The sacred palace had given the various great forces sufficient autonomy, and this also made the sect masters of the various great forces secretly breathe a sigh of relief. If the sacred palace's idea was the same as the evil god palaces and wanted to enslave the entire vast thousand world, it was obviously not something that they wanted to see. However, it was obvious that the sacred palace's philosophy was completely different from the evil god palaces, and they had never thought of enslaving the entire vast thousand world. It could be said that this gathering of the sect masters of the various great forces allowed them to fully understand the sacred palace, and at the same time, it also gave them a reassuring pill. With the end of the selection of the 10 chosen, the experts of the various great forces also left one after another and returned to their respective sections. Several days later, the Holy Palace regained its tranquility. However, Shaochen had been annoyed by Xiao Yao and Xiao Luo for the past few days. The two brats had been going out to train all day long, and they had made a lot of friends during the sacred palace's founding ceremony. They were the second-generation masters of the various major forces. Moreover, no one knew how these little fellows talked. Anyway, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao seemed to have subdued quite a number of people. Among them, Lu Yu was the most popular. It was obvious that he had become Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao's #1 follower. They had already made plans with many people to go out and gain experience together. Therefore, the two boys kept asking Shaochen to let them go out and gain experience once. Shaochen didn't refuse, but he didn't agree immediately either. He just asked the two boys to wait patiently for a while. It took a few days to finish up the work. On this day, Shaochen had a rare chance to relax. He sat in the pavilion in the courtyard with Qin Shuru, 100-Flower Fairy and the other girls. The matters of the sacred palace had basically stabilized. There were Xin Yuan Ling and the other high-level members of the sacred palace, and Song Xing and the other 5 sect masters. Shaochen had a rare chance to relax. However, this kind of leisure was obviously only temporary. Because after the matters of the sacred palace were settled, Shaochen planned to go to the source land to cultivate in seclusion. Whether he could become the world master of the vast thousand world was the most important thing for Shaochen now. As long as there was no world master, the vast thousand world had no possibility of competing with other universes. However, Shaochen didn't have much confidence in becoming the world master. Who knew if the source power would recognize him or not? But no matter what, Shaochen definitely had to try. And according to Tenza's words, after he killed Xia Tian, he would be qualified to obtain the recognition of the source power. He had already decided to go to the Source Land in the next few days. He didn't need to worry too much about the matters of the Sacred Palace. Everything was on the right track, so there were no problems. Only the two boys, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao, made Xiaochen feel a little helpless. These two boys kept pestering him to go out and train all day, which made Xiaochen feel very helpless. But counting their age, the two of them weren't young anymore. It was time for them to go out and see the world. So, in front of Qin Shuru and the other girls, Xiaochen said with a smile, "What do you think about the matter of Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao? About going out to train?" Hearing this, Qin Shuru replied softly, "Yes." Xiaochen nodded. "Go ahead. They're not young anymore, so it's time for them to go out and see the world. Moreover, there's no danger in the vast thousand world now, so it's good for them to go out and train," Qin Shuru said. Qin Shuru supported Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao to go out and train. Although as a mother, Qin Shuru was also very worried about the safety of the two. Even so, it was impossible to lock the two little guys at home forever. It was not a solution to keep protecting them like this. Moreover, the vast thousand world was basically under the control of the Sacred Palace now, and people like Xie Tian had been completely killed. There should be no problem if they were a little careful. Moreover, Xiaochen had very high expectations for Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. He could not let them stay out of the world forever. Flowers that grew up in a greenhouse would never be able to withstand the wind and rain. Hearing Qin Shuru's support, Xiaochen nodded but did not say anything. On the side, 100 Flower Fairy handed a peeled spirit fruit to Xiaochen and then said with a gentle smile, "You're worrying too much. When you were this old, you were already training outside. Let them go, nothing will happen." 100 Flower Fairy also agreed to let the two little guys go out and train by themselves. At the same time, Guling Yao, Tian Yu, and Hongxiu also said one after another, their intentions similar to 100 Flower Fairies. Hearing their words, Xiaochen shook his head and said with a smile, "Hearing you say this, it seems like I'm the one who's been stopping them. Isn't that so? You should have agreed to it long ago. Look at how anxious the two little guys are." 100 Flower Fairy said with a smile. Under the suggestions of the girls, Xiaochen finally made up his mind and agreed to let the two little guys go out and train. This time, there would be no one secretly protecting them. Without anyone protecting them, the real effect of training could be achieved. Otherwise, if there was always someone protecting them, the meaning of going out and training would completely disappear. Having made up his mind, Xiaochen said to the girls with a smile, "All right, let the two little guys go out and train, but you have to pay more attention. In a few days, your husband will be heading to the Source Land. I don't know how long this closed-door training will take, so I'll have to rely on you guys to take care of things at home." Xiaochen's trip to the Source Land was not a secret, it had been decided long ago. If it were not for the Sacred Palace, Xiaochen would have gone into closed-door training in the Source Land long ago. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2704. Hearing that Xiaochen was going to the land of origin, Qin Shuru and the other girls immediately became a little melancholy, because this time, Xiaochen was going to the land of origin. They did not know how long it would take for him to come out of seclusion, but they could not stop him. Hearing that Xiaochen was going to the land of origin, Qin Shuru and the other girls immediately became a little melancholy, because this time, Xiaochen was going to the land of origin. They did not know how long it would take for him to come out of seclusion, but they could not stop him. This was because becoming the world lord of the great wide world was something that Xiaochen could not give up, and there was no turning back. Although Xiaochen was now invincible in the great wide world, Xiaochen's strength was still not enough when compared to other universes, including the strength of the Sacred Palace. Also, only by becoming the world lord would Xiaochen truly have the capital to contend with other universes, and only then would he be able to truly protect the great wide world. "Husband, how long will you be in seclusion this time? What if I miss you?" Gu Lingyao hugged Xiao Chen's arm and said reluctantly. Compared to the other women, Gu Lingyao's personality was more like a little girl. She spoke whatever was on her mind and could not bear to part with Xiao Chen, so she spoke bluntly. Qin Shuru and the other women also could not bear to part with Xiao Chen, but they did not say anything. Xiao Chen gently patted Gu Lingyao's head and said with a smile, I don't know, but don't worry, I'll definitely come back as soon as I come out of seclusion. Xiao Chen did not know how long it would take to refine the power of the origin and become the world lord. Although he had refined a small part of the power of the origin last time, it did not mean anything at all. Therefore, Xiao Chen did not know how long this seclusion would take. Perhaps a year, perhaps 100 years, or perhaps even longer. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Gu Lingyao pouted and looked reluctant, but she had no choice. Xiao Chen had to go. At the mention of Xiao Chen going to the land of origin, everyone was obviously disappointed. In the end, it was Xiao Chen who spoke. Alright, let's not talk about this anymore. He didn't want to talk about these uncomfortable topics. Since he had to go, he might as well spend some time with the girls before he left. In the next few days, Xiao Chen did not pay any attention to the sacred palace at all. Xian Yuanling seemed to know what Xiao Chen was thinking, so he did not come to disturb him. He focused on accompanying Qin Shuru and the other girls, as well as Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue. 5 days passed. On this day, Xiao Chen called Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao over. Looking at the two boys who had grown up a lot, Xiao Chen asked with a smile. You two go out and gain experience first. Okay. Hearing this, the two of them nodded excitedly. They had wanted to go out and gain experience for a long time, and had begged Xiao Chen more than once for this reason. Unfortunately, Xiao Chen had never agreed. Seeing the two boys nodding excitedly, Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru, and Bai Hua Fairy smiled helplessly. The children had grown up and were indeed not at home. Xiao Chen shook his head and smiled bitterly. Then, he said, it's not impossible to go out and gain experience, but you have to agree to one condition. Father, please tell us. Xiao Yao asked excitedly. Well, first of all, you can't leave the great wide world and go to other minor wide worlds. Second, you have to contact Mother every day. Can you do that? Yes, no problem. In the face of Xiao Chen's request, the two boys agreed without hesitation. Looking at them, in order to be able to go out and gain experience, they would probably agree to any condition. Seeing this, Xiao Chen did not say anything else and directly asked the two of them to get ready and leave tomorrow. Since they had already agreed, there was no need to drag it out. This was Xiao Chen's character. Once he had decided on something, he would not hesitate in the slightest. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, the two boys were so excited that they danced with joy. It seemed that they had really been looking forward to going out and gaining experience alone for a long time. It was no wonder. Children were always full of curiosity about everything outside. Furthermore, this was the first time Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were going out and gaining experience alone. Seeing the two boys so happy, Xiao Chen said helplessly, "Don't forget to say goodbye to your grandparents before you leave." The two boys were the treasures of Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue, so he definitely had to tell the two elders about this. Hearing this, Xiao Yao immediately said that she would go and say goodbye to her grandparents now. After a silent night, early the next morning, with Qin Shuru, Bai Hua Fairy, Xiao Chen, Xiao Qing, and Bai Ruyue sending them off, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao finally began their first life experience. Seeing the two little ones leave the sacred palace in high spirits and stand outside the sacred palace, Xiao Chen shook his head and smiled bitterly. Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue looked worried, but fortunately, Qin Shuru was comforting them. The matter of the two little ones was resolved, and Xiao Chen also planned to leave today. After returning to his residence, Xiao Chen did not stay for long. After briefly explaining some things to Qin Shuru and the other girls, Xiao Chen left the cave residence under the reluctant gazes of his family. "You're leaving?" Xiao Chen came to bid farewell to Xian Yuanling, but before Xiao Chen could speak, Xian Yuanling took the initiative to ask. Hearing this, Xiao Chen smiled and nodded. "Yes, I'll have to trouble you with the sacred palace. Don't worry, but how long will you be in seclusion this time? Xian Yuanling asked. I don't know for the time being. After all, no one has refined the origin source energy. Moreover, according to Tenzu, everyone's refining of the origin source energy is different. Xiaochen replied truthfully. The sacred palace had Xian Yuanling, Long Qing, Sang Xing, and even Jun Wuya, so Xiaochen was not too worried. Unless experts from other universes came, there should not be too much of a problem. After a simple farewell, Xiaochen set off alone, left the sacred palace, and flew straight in the direction of the source energy. The source energy was not in the vast thousand domains, but in the endless starry sky, forming its own space. A few days later, Xiaochen also successfully arrived at the source energy. However, to Xiaochen's surprise, Tenza seemed to have been waiting here for a long time. Seeing Xiaochen arrive, Tenza said with a smile. I thought you wouldn't come until later. Everything has been arranged, so of course I came as soon as possible. Xiaochen replied with a smile. As he spoke, Xiaochen looked in the direction of the land of origin. It was different from the last time he came. Last time, the land of origin was completely sealed, but this time, the entrance to the land of origin was completely opened, as if it had been waiting for Xiaochen's arrival. Sensing Xiaochen's gaze, Tenza said with a smile, it seems that the origin source energy has made a choice. Go, there shouldn't be any problems this time. Since the origin source energy had opened the entrance, it was equivalent to acknowledging Xiaochen. If nothing unexpected happened, Xiaochen should be able to officially become the world lord of the vast thousand domains after this seclusion. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 2705. Tenza said with a smile. When he saw the origin energy open the entrance to the land of origin, Tenzu understood that the origin energy had already made its choice. When Xiaochen and Xiatian were fighting, the origin energy had closed the entrance to the land of origin. Tenza knew that the origin energy was waiting for Xiaochen and Xiatian to decide a victor. Just as Tenza had said before, Xiaochen and Xiatian could win. Whoever defeated the other would be recognized by the origin energy and become the true world master of the vast thousand world. Now it seemed that his guess was not wrong. The origin energy was indeed waiting. Now that Xiaochen had killed Xiatian and established the sacred palace, the origin energy had chosen Xiaochen. This was not strange. After all, in the entire vast thousand world, who could compete with Xiaochen? Moreover, almost all the experts in the vast thousand world had been won over by Xiaochen to the sacred palace, so how could they dare to covet the position of world master? Therefore, in the current vast thousand world, there was no one who could compete with Xiaochen for the position of world master. He said to Xiaochen with a smile. Hearing this, Xiaochen also had a faint smile on his face. He looked at Tenzu and nodded. Yes. After saying this, Xiaochen did not hesitate and directly entered the land of origin. Looking at Xiaochen's back, a complicated look flashed in Tenza's eyes. There were some words that Tenza did not say because it was not the time yet. If Xiaochen really obtained the recognition of the origin energy and became the world master of the vast thousand world, then Tenzu would submit to Xiaochen. Moreover, with the appearance of a world master in the vast thousand world, Tenzu's strength would also undergo a qualitative leap, just like the Great World and the Hongmeng World. Currently, Tenzu's cultivation was equivalent to the Emperor Realm Great Perfection, but if a world master appeared in the vast thousand world, then Tenzu's cultivation would quickly rise to the Ancestor Realm Great Perfection. Just like the Hongmeng World and the Great World's Tenzu, this was also stipulated by the laws of heaven and earth. However, all of this depended on whether or not Xiaochen could gain the approval of the power of the origin. If he could not gain the approval of the power of the origin, then all of this was just empty talk. Tenza did not stay here for long. Previously, he was waiting here for Xiaochen's arrival. Now that Xiaochen had entered the land of origin, the entrance to the land of origin closed with Xiaochen's entry. No one could enter, and no one could disturb Xiaochen. Therefore, there was naturally no need for Tenzu to wait here. His figure disappeared outside the land of origin, and Xiaochen, who had entered the land of origin, quickly went deep into the land of origin and saw the origin energy again. There was no change from the last time, and it still gave off a mysterious feeling. However, when Xiaochen saw the origin energy again, he felt a sense of closeness. This was probably because he had refined some of the origin energy, or because the origin energy had a preliminary recognition of him, so the two sides seemed to be much closer. One could not say that the origin energy did not have spiritual intelligence, but it could not be said that it had spiritual intelligence either. It was a very strange existence. It was the origin of all the powers in the great wide world. Although it could not speak and did not seem to think, the origin energy had its own thoughts. This time, Xiaochen was also excited to discover that he could actually feel the meaning of the origin energy, just like how Xiaochen felt close to the origin energy in the beginning. Xiaochen reached out and tried to touch the power of the origin. This time, the power of the origin did not evade or resist. Xiaochen was able to touch the power of the origin without a hitch. When the two came into contact, Xiaochen seemed to have a sudden thunderclap in his mind. A voice told Xiaochen that he was the world lord of the great wide world. It was a very strange feeling, but Xiaochen did not know that this was actually a manifestation of the origin energy's recognition. The origin energy recognized Xiaochen as the world lord of the great wide world and protected the prosperity of the great wide world. As such a message flashed in his mind, the origin energy soon began to surge into Xiaochen's body. Through the pores and skin of his body, the origin energy directly poured into Xiaochen's body and automatically swam in Xiaochen's body. As the origin energy entered his body, Xiaochen was stunned for a moment. He found that he could not do anything, or rather, he did not have to do anything. Yes, he did not need to take the initiative to do anything at all. The origin energy automatically swam in his body. Moreover, with the movement of the origin energy, Xiaochen found that his dantian was also slowly changing, and the changes were huge. Originally, the dantian of every warrior was more or less the same and was considered the core of a warrior. However, under the changes of the origin energy, Xiaochen's dantian underwent earth-shaking changes. It was as if it had become a mini version of the great wide world. That's right. At this moment, when Xiaochen looked into his dantian, he found that his dantian was actually very similar to the great wide world. It could even be said that it was a mini version of the great wide world. His dantian had become the entire great wide world. Was this the power of the origin energy? Was this also the most fundamental difference between a world lord and an ordinary warrior? No wonder Lin Yun once said that no matter how talented an ordinary warrior was, it was impossible for them to break through to the World Lord realm in their lifetime because it was simply impossible to reach this realm through cultivation. One could only succeed if they were recognized by the origin energy. This was for sure. Transforming one's dantian into a universe was obviously not something that could be achieved through cultivation. Without the origin energy, who could achieve this step? As the world lord of the great wide world, Xiaochen's dantian was the great wide world. As for Lin Yun, as the world lord of the great wide world, his dantian was probably the great wide world. The dantian of every world lord was the universe they were in. This was the reason why world lords were truly powerful. His dantian was slowly changing. Xiaochen also found that his cultivation had begun to degrade rapidly at this moment. It fell all the way from the ancestor realm to the immortal emperor realm, and it was still falling at this time. Xiaochen had no way to control such a fall in cultivation, but he didn't feel any discomfort. Although it was strange, Xiaochen couldn't do anything at this time. He could only choose to wait and see. Xiaochen didn't know what the process of fusing with the origin energy was like. Even Tenzu and Lin Yun didn't know because Lin Yun had told him before. Everyone's process of fusing with the origin energy was different. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 2706. This was what Lin Yun told Xiaochen. Back then, Xiaochen asked Lin Yun this question out of curiosity, but Lin Yun gave him such an answer. This was what Lin Yun told Xiaochen. Back then, Xiaochen asked Lin Yun this question out of curiosity, but Lin Yun gave him such an answer. Moreover, according to Lin Yun, his situation was very different from Xiaochen's. The most fundamental point was that the status of the origin powers of the two universes was different. The origin powers of the Great Wide World had always been in an ownerless state, but the origin powers of the Great Wide World were not the same. Lin Yun's origin powers were inherited from his grandfather. It could be said that Lin Yun's grandfather directly passed the origin powers to Lin Yun. Therefore, the situation between the two was very different. He did not know what kind of process Lin Yun went through when refining the origin powers, but Xiaochen could feel it very clearly now. His cultivation kept falling until there was no cultivation at all. Then, he started from the beginning and improved little by little until he reached the ancestor realm. Just like that, Xiaochen continued to fall and recover. However, he did not feel the slightest bit of discomfort throughout the entire process. Not only did he not feel uncomfortable at all, but Xiaochen also clearly felt that with such a fall, not only did his foundation become more and more solid, but some of the small problems in the process of cultivation were perfectly repaired during the whole process. No warrior dared to say that his cultivation was flawless during the process of cultivation. It was impossible. In such a long time, no matter how much one paid attention, it was impossible to be perfect. Xiaochen also knew this, and he used to be the same. However, compared to other warriors, Xiaochen's cultivation could be said to be relatively perfect, but it was not without some problems. It was just that these problems were very small and had almost no effect. However, this was not true perfection after all. With the help of the origin powers, Xiaochen found that his cultivation was gradually becoming more and more perfect. Every time he recovered, his cultivation would become more solid. It was hard to imagine that if this continued, wouldn't his cultivation be truly perfect? He was secretly excited inside that the power of the origin powers was indeed very powerful. It could actually repair such small flaws and make him truly perfect. During the whole process, Xiaochen did not need to do anything himself. Xiaochen could not do anything. At the same time, in the land of origin, Xiaochen could not feel the passage of time at all. He could not even feel the existence of time. It was as if this was a corner that had been forgotten by time. Shrouded by the origin powers, Xiaochen had no idea how much time had passed. Everything was very quiet in the land of origin. Only Xiaochen was receiving the strengthening of the origin powers. In the outside world, 90 years had passed since Xiaochen entered the land of origin. 90 years had passed, but in Xiaochen's land of origin, it seemed like only a moment had passed, but 90 years had passed in the outside world. During these 90 years, nothing major had happened in the Great Thousand World, and the strength of the sacred palace had grown increasingly stronger with the development of these decades. Moreover, Jun Wuyao was not the only ancestor realm expert in the sacred palace. Dao Ju, Luo Xing, Dan Qingyang, and the Talisman Gate ancestor had all broken through to the ancestor realm one after another. In addition, Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Song Xing, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, Dan Xian, and Chu Ming had also broken through to the ancestor realm. In these 90 years, the sacred palace had undergone a qualitative transformation. The number of ancestor realm experts had increased from 2 to 12, and this did not include the sacred master Xiaochen. Although there was still a gap between them and old powerful forces like the Cloud Palace and the Immortal Hall, the Sacred Palace now had the ability to compete with these old powerful forces. However, if one were to talk about the people who changed the most in these 90 years, it would be Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. Ever since their first training, the two little guys had completely let go of themselves. Moreover, their talents seemed to have been stimulated and were completely stimulated. In just a few decades, both of their cultivations had broken through to the entry level of the Dao realm. This kind of cultivation could not be said to be the strongest in the Great Wide World, but it was definitely not weak either. Coupled with their age, it was enough to make everyone stunned. At the same time, because of their identity, they quickly attracted a group of loyal followers in the Great Thousand World. However, perhaps because Xiaochen was not around, the two little guys had also caused a lot of trouble. Although the two of them did not bully the weak, they were very nosy. Moreover, Xiao Lao's character had also become very impulsive, so they had caused a lot of trouble in the Great Thousand World. As such, many people in the Great Thousand World called these two little demons. They liked to cause trouble, but they were not annoying. This was the world's evaluation of the two little guys. Wherever the two little guys went, there was no lack of trouble. It was not easy to return to the sword sect, but after a few days, they planned to go out again. However, just as the two were about to leave, they bumped into Qin Shuru and Tianyu. First mother, fourth mother. Seeing their mother, the two little guys smiled and greeted them, then prepared to leave. As they were getting older, Qin Shuru and the other girls naturally did not control them like before. However, this time, before the two of them could take a step, Qin Shuru said indifferently, "Stop." Hearing this, the two of them stopped. Qin Shuru then sat down on the stone bench and said, "Come here. I heard that the two of you went to the Purple Sun sect last month to challenge them. You even injured some people. Is that true?" He did not know what the two little guys were thinking recently. They actually planned to challenge all the sects in the Great Thousand World. Of course, this was only limited to cultivators of the same generation. Even so, in just a few months, the two of them had challenged 20 to 30 sections. Moreover, every time they did so, they would cause a huge ruckus. Although the sects did not pursue the matter, the two of them had indeed crossed the line. Today, he heard from Shen Yuanling that the two of them had challenged the Purple Sun sect a few days ago. For this, the Sacred Palace seemed to have made some compensation to appease the Purple Sun sect. Hearing Qin Shuiro's words, Xiao Yao lowered his head and didn't say anything. However, Xiao Luo didn't care and said, "Yes, but we didn't want to hurt anyone. It's inevitable to get hurt when fighting. We are not without a doubt." Xiao Lao was straightforward and did not think that this was a big deal. Moreover, they had discussed with Lu Yu about the challenge to the Purple Sun sect, and Lu Yu had readily agreed to it. Please add, vote, recommend. Chapter 2707. Xiao Lao thought that this was just a simple sparring session, and since it was a sparring session, injuries were inevitable. Furthermore, they did not use too much force, so there was nothing wrong with Xiao Lao not recognizing the two brothers. Xiao Lao thought that this was just a simple sparring session, and since it was a sparring session, injuries were inevitable. Furthermore, they did not use too much force, so there was nothing wrong with Xiao Lao not recognizing the two brothers. However, they obviously did not expect that a challenge like this would not be a problem for the two brothers. The reason was very simple: they were Xiao Chen's sons. Following the exposure of Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao's identities, many people in the Great Thousand World knew that they were Xiao Chen's sons. Therefore, on a certain level, their every move could represent the Sacred Palace and even Xiao Chen's attitude. It was precisely because of this that the two brothers should be more careful and think twice before acting. However, at their age, the two brothers obviously could not do this. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that the two brothers did not do anything that would anger the heavens and the people. Furthermore, the two brothers had a good reputation in the Great Thousand World. When people talked about the two brothers, most people only felt that they were a little belligerent, had a lively personality, and liked to meddle in other people's business. They did not think that there was anything wrong with the two brothers. This was the only good thing about the two brothers. However, after hearing Xiao Lao's words, Qin Shuru still said coldly, "Don't go out during this period of time. Stay at home with peace of mind." For the time being, he did not intend to let the two brothers leave the Sacred Palace. In recent years, the two brothers had caused enough trouble. Qin Shuru felt that it was time for the two of them to immerse themselves in it for a period of time. Furthermore, he wanted to discipline them properly. Upon hearing Qin Shuru's words, Xiao Lao was immediately unhappy. However, Xiao Yao did not object too much. It was obvious that he had already guessed the ant's intention. Compared to Xiao Yao was more meticulous, while Xiao Lao was more impulsive and simple. Seeing that Xiao Yao nodded in agreement, Qin Shuru nodded slightly. Then, he once again explicitly forbade the two brothers from leaving the sacred palace. Immediately after, he left with Tian Yu. Sigh, these two little guys are so worrisome. As he walked, Qin Shuru said to Tian Yu with a bitter smile. These two brats, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao, had almost caused Qin Shuru, Flower Fairy, Guling Yao, and Tian Yu to become mentally and physically exhausted. Moreover, they were at the age where they would cause trouble. Upon hearing Qin Shuru's words, Tian Yu smiled and said, "Big sister, you're exaggerating." Although Yaoer and Laoer's temperament is a little out of whack, there's nothing wrong with them. Aren't children of this age all like this? Sigh, when my husband was their age, he was already able to hold his own. Qin Shuru sighed. When Xiaochen was Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao's age, he was indeed much more mature than the two of them. However, there was a reason for this. First of all, the most important thing was the difference in the environment they grew up in. Xiaochen could be said to have grown up alone. When he was very young, he went out to experience things by himself. When he was at the same age as Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao, Xiaochen had already experienced too many things. Therefore, his personality was naturally much more mature than the other two. Secondly, there was the issue of identity. Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao could be said to be the biggest second-generation rich kids in the Great Thousand World. Almost no one dared to provoke them in the Great Thousand World. As a result, their personalities were naturally affected. At the very least, when they did things, they would instinctively ignore certain things. After all, there were many times when the two brothers did things without considering the consequences. This was because no matter what the consequences were, their parents would resolve it for them. To be honest, the two of them did not become bullies. This was all thanks to Xiaochen and Qin Shuru's successful education. Century Qin Shuru and Tianyu left, while Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao did not leave the sacred palace. The two of them returned to their residence dejectedly. For the next half a month, Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao were kept in the sacred palace by Qin Shuru. Every day, Qin Shuru and 100 Flower Fairy would personally teach the two of them. Of course, this time, the teaching was not to teach the two of them cultivation, but to learn how to conduct themselves in the world. The two boys' cultivation had improved so quickly that even Qin Shuru and 100 Flower Fairy were shocked. The two of them had perfectly inherited their father, Xiao Chen's talent, and their cultivation speed was extremely fast. While the two of them were learning, the black hole in the Great Thousand World had become a forbidden area. Throughout the year, there were sacred palace experts taking turns to guard it to prevent people from other universes from entering the Great Thousand World. On this day, Zhou Huan, who was in charge of guarding the black hole, suddenly discovered that a space spirit boat was slowly entering the Great Thousand World from the black hole. The mysterious appearance of the space spirit boat made Zhou Huan nervous. Zhou Huan immediately led people to block the space spirit boat and sent the news back to the sacred palace. Zhou Huan did not directly attack. After all, she did not know who the intruders were, what their purpose was, and whether they had malicious intentions. Therefore, Zhou Huan asked politely, "May I ask what purpose you have in my Great Thousand World? Please don't take offense. We are all from the Red Wind World and have no malicious intentions. We are just traveling here." Following Zhou Huan's words, an old woman appeared on the spatial spirit boat and spoke in a courteous manner. Fear flashed across Zhou Huan's eyes the moment she saw this old woman. This was because this old woman was an ancestor stage expert. After a few decades, Zhou Huan's cultivation had also broken through to the perfect emperor realm and was only a step away from the ancestor realm. The old woman's cultivation made Zhou Huan's heart palpitate. There was no doubt that she was an ancestor realm master. Moreover, that was not all. With the appearance of Old O, two beautiful women and a young girl, as well as more than 100 other women in palace attire, appeared on the deck one after another. The two beautiful women leading the group were at the ancestor stage just like the old woman, while the young girl was at the initial stage of the Tao stage. However, from the looks of it, it was obvious that the young girl's identity was not simple because everyone was gathered around the young girl. Clearly, they were protecting her. With so many masters suddenly arriving in the Great Thousand World, Zhou Huan had no choice but to treat them with caution. He had never heard of the Red Wind World mentioned by the other party, so he did not know what the situation in this universe was. However, judging from the appearance of these people, they did not seem to be evil cultivators or demon cultivators, so Zhou Huan still opened his mouth to reply. "Are you all here to travel? Do you have any other purpose?" In response to Zhou Huan's question, the young girl leading the group smiled and said, "Yes, we are indeed just purely traveling and have no other purpose. By the way, where is this place? What's its name? I have never been here before." Chapter 2708. The girl said in a crisp voice. She looked innocent and naive, as if she was just a little girl who had not seen much of the world. However, Zhou Huan did not let down her guard because of this. Instead, she replied calmly, "I'm really sorry. I can't let you enter the Great Thousand World now. I need to wait for the experts of our sect to come and make a decision," the girl said in a crisp voice. She looked innocent and naive, as if she was just a little girl who had not seen much of the world. However, Zhou Huan did not let down her guard because of this. Instead, she replied calmly, "I'm really sorry. I can't let you enter the Great Thousand World now. I need to wait for the experts of our sect to come and make a decision." One of the two beautiful women immediately said coldly, "Impudent, do you think you can stop us?" As she spoke, a soaring aura instantly erupted from her body. Zhou Huan and the many sacred palace experts present instantly tensed up when they sensed the powerful aura from the beautiful woman. Just as the woman was about to attack, the ancestor stage experts from the sacred palace arrived in time. They were Dao Xiong, Jun Wuya, Xiao Xiao, Dan Qingyang, and the other three ancestors. Dao Ju and the other two had also broken through to the ancestor stage over the past few decades. Zhou Huan secretly breathed a sigh of relief when the four ancestors arrived, while Jun Wuya looked at the beautiful woman with an unfriendly expression. "Everyone, I'm afraid it's not appropriate to barge into the vast thousand world for no reason and attack." With that, Jun Wuya and the other three immediately blocked the path of the spatial spirit ship. Facing Jun Wuya and the other three, the beautiful woman did not have the slightest intention of backing down. Instead, she stared coldly at Jun Wuya and the others. However, the girl spoke first. "That's enough, Aunt May. We're not here to cause trouble." Aunt May reluctantly withdrew her aura after hearing the girl's words. After some discussion, everyone understood the purpose of the girl and the others' visit, as well as some information about the Red Wind World. The girl's name was Dongfan Lin, and it was said that she came from an overlord force in the Red Wind World. However, Dongfang Lin did not say much about the force she belonged to. She simply said that her trip to the Great Thousand World this time was completely an unexpected discovery. This time, he was going out to gather strength, while Aunt May and the other two ancestor powerhouses were in charge of protecting him along the way. During their training, they accidentally discovered the spatial black hole that led to the Great Thousand World, which was why they appeared here. He did not come to the Great Thousand Realms with any ill intentions, nor did he have any motives. He was purely curious. After explaining the matter truthfully, Dongfan Lin sincerely requested Jun Wuya and the others to let her enter the vast thousand world and promised that she would not do anything out of line in the vast thousand world. After the discussion, Jun Wuya and the others finally agreed to Dongfan Lin's request, but the condition was that they had to be under the protection of the Holy Palace. Rather than protection, it was more appropriate to describe it as surveillance. After all, Dongfang Lin was protected by three ancestor powerhouses. Unless the Holy Palace took action, Dongfang Lin and the others would not be in any danger in the vast thousand world. Aunt May and the other two ancestor-level experts were extremely displeased by this. However, Dongfang Lin agreed to it without any hesitation. Perhaps she felt that since she had never thought of doing anything out of line, it was fine if she was being monitored. She just wanted to see how this unfamiliar vast thousand world was different from the Red Wind world. After the agreement was made, the group led Dongfang Lin into the vast thousand world. Of course, the first stop was where the Holy Palace was. Dongfang Lin did not refuse, and was even looking forward to it. After all, as the ruler of the vast thousand world, Dongfang Lin also wanted to see what the Holy Palace was like, and how it was different from the force she belonged to. In short, the feeling that Dongfang Lin gave people was that she was a little girl with a lively personality. She was innocent and didn't have too much vigilance against people. This was very similar to Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao. Perhaps because of Dongfang Lin's influence, Jun Wuyuan and the others slowly relaxed their vigilance. On the other hand, Aunt May and the other two ancestor powerhouses were quite critical of the Holy Palace's overbearing behavior. If Dongfang Lin had not stopped them, the three would have been angry long ago. The group quickly arrived at the Holy Palace on the spatial spirit boat. Dongfang Lin exclaimed when she saw the Holy Palace. "This is the Holy Palace you were talking about? It's not bad." The current Holy Palace was indeed incomparable to the Sword sect of the past. It was not inferior to the Immortal Palace or the Cloud Palace. Of course, when Shaochen expanded the Holy Palace, the standards were completely based on the Immortal Palace and the Cloud Palace. Therefore, from the outside, the Holy Palace was indeed an extremely powerful sect that could rule over a part of the universe. They curiously stood on the spatial spirit boat and sized up the Holy Palace below. Jun Wuya and the others did not stop them. After safely returning to the Holy Palace, Jun Wuya and the others handed Dongfang Lin and the others over to Shen Yuanling. The four of them did not have the mood to bother about these matters. Hence, this task naturally landed on Shen Yuanling. After Shen Yuanling prepared a residence for the group, he began to chat with the three ancestor stage experts. Of course, most of the time, both parties were merely probing each other. The arrival of Dongfang Lin and the others did not have much of an impact on the Great Thousand World, but everyone in the Sacred Palace was filled with curiosity about these foreign experts from other universes. Therefore, news of Dongfang Lin and the others soon spread in the Sacred Palace. However, it was impossible for ordinary disciples to see Dongfang Lin and the others because Shen Yuanling had directly arranged a cave dwelling for Dongfang Lin and the others. Unrelated people could not enter at all. In this place, Dongfang Lin's identity was special. The three ancestor powerhouses who accompanied her, as well as the other experts from the Red Wind world, would not let anyone enter the cave dwelling at will. As a result, although many people were very curious about Dongfang Lin, no one had seen her before. However, the news spread wider and wider, and Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao soon learned about it. Xiao Lao was the first to hear the news and immediately told his brother. "Brother, something big happened." Xiao Yao asked when he saw Xiao Lao's excited face as he hurriedly ran back to the brother's residence. "What happened? Why are you so excited?" Since Xiao Luo was so excited, it was clearly not a small matter. Xiao Yao also asked curiously. Hearing this, Xiao Luo did not hesitate and directly explained the matter. "Brother, experts from other universes have come to the vast thousand world. They are now in the sect. Uncle is entertaining them. Should we go and take a look?" The two brothers were naturally most interested in the affairs of other universes. Unfortunately, it was obviously impossible for the two of them to leave the vast thousand world alone. Therefore, it was not strange that the two of them were so excited when they heard that people from other universes had come to the vast thousand world. Please collect, monthly vote, recommend. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.